All right, I think that's us started. Let me just check if it's running.
I've got it on here anyway.
Let's see. It should be up and running, just making sure. Have I
Yep, that's it.
have I done something wrong again? It seems to be my thing. No, it's going. It seems to be going.
Yeah, I just got a notification for it, so
Coolest. Okay, so that's us live then. So welcome everyone. Um, let's have another chinwag for 3 hours or something. Today's topic being music production, which was came up ad hoc last time because we were talking, about songwriting, and because we all do this, we end up songwriting and playing and ending up, doing the recording, or at least being heavily involved in the recording side of things. So it came up in the talkie talk, and so we decided, well, we'll make this today's subject, topic, or whatever. And we quickly came up with a few kind of subcopies, subcategories, or whatever. How did we get into recording? What gear are we using? How do we define our approach to recording? Do we have an artistic philosophy, or is it just utilitarian exercise? What is our current setup, and what are its key features? How does that inform our process, and how would we improve it? What are the records that made us want to record? And what is it about their method or sound that inspired us? And is the recording tech industry just serving the profession, or is it driving trends within the profession that aren't necessarily improvements, or maybe movements? So quick plug, obviously, we've got Peter and Max. In the links, you'll see all the in the description below. You'll see all the links to their stuff, and also shameless plug being that I've got 15% off until the 22nd of December on all the pedals in the shop. Oh, again, links are below. So I was thinking, Max, we'll start with you today. I like the first question. How did we get into recording? Oh, wait. Sorry, apologies. I've got something to share because we've been. This has to be done today. This is one of my favorite budget whiskies. The Bunnahabhain Deutsche Hadar peated whiskey from Isla. So that shall be my beverage for tonight. One of my favorites.
I've never actually heard of that one.
It's not the most common, but it is in most shops. Maybe not necessarily Tesco, but
yeah.
So 1 second. All right, why don't you carry on?
Yeah. Okay. So, what was the question? How did I get into production? Okay, so we're talking probably early to mid 90s. So I think probably I think how it started for me. It's I don't really have like a pithy anecdote about one specific thing. I think it was a gradual. I think it was a combination of several things, and I think it was fairly gradual. I think it was. I think we got lent a 4-track cassette 4-track by someone at my dad was a teacher at my school, and I think some I don't know, someone who worked in the art department or something knew that I was interested in music and played music or whatever, so lent him this 4-track, and sort of he brought it home, and I don't think he really knew what it, but he basically was like, here, try this thing, and so I was intrigued by the possibility of recording one thing and putting it next to another thing, although at the time, I wasn't enough of a musician to really understand, you know, what I might be able to do with that. Um, and then I think so. I started I started joining bands and all that kind of stuff, and I think I just started to find it really frustrating that I was working I was playing music with guys who were barely competent, and I wasn't that much more competent, and so it was very difficult to kind of be in a situation where you could sort of write a song and put a song together and explain your ideas musically to other people. And so it just struck me that the easiest thing to do would be to just make a recording. And so I think I just came by the idea that it would be a really good idea to get like a multi-track cassette recorder. So that's what I did, and I think it was when I was 16 that I finally got my first 8-track cassette recorder. It was a Tascam Porta Studio. And I remember at the time sort of the struggle actually being to find cassettes that would work with it without it destroying them, because it ran at 4 times the speed of a normal tape player. So if you had a cassette that was an hour long or whatever, then you could only get like 7 or 8 minutes of recording on one side. So the problem is that most sort of commercially bought blank cassettes are actually, the tape stock's quite thin, and running at that speed through a tape machine would put too much pressure on it, and it would end up distorting them. So you'd get like some kind of weird sort of vibrato effect on it, chorusing or whatever. It would just basically it would just well, actually it's wow, isn't it? Or is it Flutter? I'm not sure which it is. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Wow and Flutter.
Yeah, there you go. Well, basically, yeah. So it wasn't the tape machine malfunctioning. It was just the tapes were hard to come by. But that's sort of how I cut my teeth initially. I just started out like I had an acoustic guitar, and I had an electric guitar, and I had an amplifier, and I had a microphone. And so my first experiments in recording were putting a microphone in front of an acoustic guitar and recording several tracks of that and putting them next to each other, which was pleasing. It was very satisfying. And then I'd do 4 tracks of guitar and then 4 tracks of vocals. And then I learned how to like bounce tracks down to other tracks if you wanted to use more than 8 tracks, which was also kind of interesting. Never really fully satisfying, because I mean, I didn't know at the time, but there's all kinds of other things that you need to actually make audio sound good. Just taking a microphone recording onto a cassette, usually doesn't yield particularly pleasing results. But I think probably for what they weren't terrible. But then very quickly it became apparent that I would really need like some kind of way of making drums. I think around that time, it was completely. I was living in an apartment at the time, so it was completely out of the question for me to own a drum kit. I think I tried to record a friend's drum kit using sort of the Glyn Johns method, which is basically so Glyn Johns. There we go, on to our first nugget of proper information. The Glyn Johns method is to use basically 2 stereo overheads and then a microphone roughly, I think, 2 meters away from the front of the kick, and basically that gives you a stereo picture of the drum kit, while also being able to reproduce the sort of the transients of the kick and the snare. And that's a method people still quite commonly use, and it can be used to quite good effect. But I think the key really there is having pretty good preamps and pretty good compressors going into whatever system you're using, and I didn't have any of that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm gonna jump in here because the Glyn Johns method is fairly famous. It's supposed to be like a 4 mic, complete capture. The other day I watched a video about somebody going, "Oh, this is how I use the Glyn Johns method," and he set up the mics just as you would in the Glyn Johns method, and then he added another mic in the middle of the kit. Then he added a room mic. Then he added 2 or 3 more mics to it as well. Anyway, and he was going on about his Glenn Johns method. It's like, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, use the Glenn Johns method and another method as well. Yeah,
and
yeah.
close
So
miking and room miking and
yeah,
so
brilliant. Yeah, yeah.
He had enough mics, he could have just mic'd the kit properly.
he could have
Well,
exactly.
yeah, exactly. Both mic the kit and then get some room mics in as well. But yeah. So moving on from, so basically, I didn't like any of that. That was too much of a hassle. There's no way that I could rely on just being able to get hold of my friend's drum kit or whatever. You know, so because I wanted to record loads, so I kind of I came by some recording software that was like, well, it was a drum machine program. It was called, I think it was called Cool Edit or something like that. Um, and which, well, so Cool Edit eventually developed into Cool Edit Pro, which then developed into Adobe Audition, I think. But anyway, Cool Edit, the initial thing was basically like a drum machine, so rudimentary that it cut off the fourth beat of every bar. So basically, you didn't have any spill from the fourth bar from the fourth beat of the bar into the following bar. So if you had a cymbal on that beat, it would basically do like a grab. So it sounded fucking terrible. But what it was a good way of at least experimenting with doing that kind of stuff. So using that, I kind of learned how to write drums, and I learned how to. So it's kind of a two-tier thing, because obviously I was not only learning how to record, I was also learning how to be a recording artist as well, because I didn't have anyone else who, I made some demos for my band or whatever, but it became quickly quite clear to me that there was actually a skill to being recorded when you play, and that if you can be a good musician, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be any good at being a studio musician. Because it's a whole different skill set, which is probably the reason why there are so many session guys who get all the work, because they're the guys who are really good at it, and everyone else is just the musician. Anyway, so that kind of ran and ran and ran, and I did that for a few years, and then in the late '90s, I think, it started to become accessible. Started to become I think so. Cool Edit Pro at that point happened. I think the first edition of that software had like 4 tracks that you could record to, and then you had to bounce them. So I had that for a while, and you could record. And this is before there was any such thing as like plugins or anything like that. It was basically you could record audio, and then you could apply effects destructively to that audio. So you could record, some vocals or whatever, and then if you wanted to put reverb on those vocals, you could apply a reverb effect, and that would then print the vocal with that effect on it. So did that for a bit. I think it was probably the early 2000s, probably talking about sort of 2004, 2005, before I had a computer that was good enough and software that was good enough to run. I'm skipping a bunch of stuff because it's very, there's loads of iterations of what I was trying to do. But basically, yeah, sort of the mid 2000s, we're going to say, I started having computer systems that could run software that you might describe as semi-professional, where, there's unlimited tracks and you could use VSTs and all that kind of stuff. And then it was just a matter of availing RAM. And it was at that point, really, that I started to realize that having a DAW or any kind of, whatever tape machine you use, whether it's an actual tape machine or a DAW or whatever is, a hard drive recording system, is just it's the main thing you need, but there's loads of other things that you need as well. And especially at the time, I mean, VSTs at the time were nothing like what they are now. Now you have VSTs that are like, absolutely, perfect recreations of, celebrated vintage equipment, all that kind of stuff. You can take a raw mic signal and put it through a plug-in of a compressor, and it's exactly as if you'd put it through an 1176 going in. But I think I probably skipped a lot of that because I was very, very poor when I was in my 20s. So I didn't have anything like the money to be able to start thinking about owning, rack equipment or anything like that. I think actually it was probably like the mid 2000s before I had what you would describe as a set of studio monitors. Before then, I was just mixing on stereo systems. So I think what characterized a lot of my initial learning production was finding workarounds and how to fix stuff and how to work within the limitations of having either no gear or shit gear. And the first time I actually was in a real recording studio was probably 2005. So I spent basically 10 years learning how to record without ever going near any proper recording equipment. So that was a bit sort of tricky, but basically since that point, like many people I expect, I have the internet fully to thank for this, is that now you have basically this infinite resource of people who very generously share all manner of recording techniques and documentaries and, resources and information and all that kind of stuff about what equipment they use and how they use it and how you might want to use it. And, on YouTube alone, there are millions of videos of people showing you how to use a condenser microphone and how to mic up a guitar cab, or what your track should look like in a DAW and how you can mix things and how to master stuff and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's basically like now I'm where I guess it's leveled the playing field a little bit, because I think if I've taken anything away from that is that I learned a lot of bad habits that I've had to unlearn. And I was actually just earlier listening to some stuff that I recorded, like, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. God, it sounds terrible. It sounds really bad. Not that the stuff I record now is, amazing, but at the same time, it's like, it's yeah, it's usable. But that stuff is just like, I don't even know what I was thinking. But to give you an idea, it's like, we've talked before about, digital guitar equipment, amp emulations and all that kind of stuff. I think so. Most of the demos that I made between, let's say, 2001 and 2007, all of the guitars were recorded using a Digitech RP2000 multi-effects floor unit that just like happened to have like a sort of guitar amp emulations on it. And if you listen to those recordings now, as I was doing earlier, it's just the guitar tone. It's just like it's barely a guitar tone. You can barely hear the guitar. It's just weird, but it's like, but that's what I had. So that's what I had to work with. And it's like, that's it. I didn't even have access to like enough reasonably good guitar amplifiers that it would have been worth getting a guitar amplifier and putting a microphone in front of that instead of using the multi. And then again, the thing is it's like, it's because I wanted to put out the volume of work. I just wanted to keep recording. I recorded hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs over that time. So it was more important to just keep writing and recording the material than it was necessarily to sort of focus on putting together some kind of reasonable recording studio. So that's kind of, that's how I got into it. And there's I'm sort of the latter years, the last few years, I think now it's like I would describe myself as a sort of a semi-professional producer slash engineer slash mixer slash mastering engineer. But that's really, I've only kind of got to the point where I could even consider charging someone for those things, in the last few years, really. So most of my kind of recording life has been spent being terrible and working with terrible people. So there you go. That's my story.
I would imagine that this, I'm gonna call it a struggle through the early years, has been very valuable.
Some of it had. Some of it has, and some of, in hindsight, and hindsight is always 2020. you can see, can't you, sort of, the things that you did wrong, and I think I learned. It was, it's been an education in what not to do. But because I had bad gear and bad sources and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't really know what I was doing, I spent an awful lot of my time fixing stuff. I was like most of the time I spent, mixing wasn't mixing, it was fixing. Because I had really bad recordings. I recorded stuff really badly using really bad gear. So there's not a lot you can do with that other than just try and sort of,
Yeah.
hack away at it until it sounds like something. Now it's like, earlier today I was just enjoying the fact that I've got a good guitar amplifier and I've got an SM57 and I've put it into an interface with good preamps, and I'm putting that into a DAW that works flawlessly into a pretty good computer. I'm listening through very good studio monitors. And so I recorded this guitar, and it's just like I didn't have to do anything to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I tickled it with a compressor, and then I made like an incremental adjustment using an EQ just to kind of get it to sit just perfect. But I could have left it because it's just the sound source was good and the equipment's good and it just works. And it's just like, if I had had that from like 1995 onwards, then I'd probably be making fucking platinum records right now. But go for my catch up, I guess.
Over to you, Peter. Is Peter still there?
I don't know.
He's either. No, he's. I think
He's gone very, very still. I think he's frozen. I think we've lost him.
Yeah. Have we lost ourselves? Let me just check the stream quick. Hold on.
I think we're doing okay.
I think so.
I think it's just Peter.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Wait,
Here we
he's
go.
back. He's back.
I don't know.
Hello,
What
sir.
happened
Hey,
there? Yeah,
just this
just
time.
I couldn't get it to come back up.
No worries, man. It was not even 30 seconds. All good. It's over to you, by the way.
Yeah, I'm relatively new to the recording thing, only in recent years, apart from having a BR 900 Boss years ago that I never really done much with.
What's that? What was that one?
It was an 8-track CD one.
Oh, right.
And you could record 8 tracks, and it had a drum machine that was really awkward to use. I've actually still got it, believe it or not. It's in the practice space, but I don't even know if it still works. But, yeah, so I've only really got into it in the last few years properly, and it was kind of like these must. I browned at a mate's house and we'd record and program some drums, and I just weren't doing it that regularly, so I just bit the bullet and started doing it myself. And it was more out of necessity because it helped me write songs as such to try and get a new band going. It became more of that, and then I kind of you get hooked on it very quick, so I got more into that. But as for the mixing side of it, I mean, the only thing I've mixed is a couple of theme tunes I've done for 2 radio stations. It was just for 2 metal radio shows. I done like a theme tune for it, and apart from that, with no vocals. Oh well, there was the kind of spoken word thing over the top. But apart from that, mixing wise, I'm still very, very much wet behind the ears with that side of it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be mixing my own band stuff, but we're going to be tracking ourselves. I feel confident enough doing that, but we won't be mixing, or we won't be actually recording and tracking the drums ourselves. We'll be just doing the guitars and the vocals and the bass.
Are you going to be doing that with miking up a cab, or are you going to do that with Sims?
I'll be doing it with just doing it here in this room. DI with VSTs, and we might possibly reamp.
Okay.
We're just gonna let the guy that's mixing it all what he wants to do with it. It might end up in VSTs. I'm not that precious, to be honest, about whether it's real amps or not anymore, because VST sounds so good now. In mixes, it's hard to tell. Like the guy that's mixing it, he does front of house for Bleed From Within. So he's on tour around Europe with them at the moment, and their last album was done by Nolly, and it sounds incredible. It's VSTs. It's neural DSP plugins on the guitars on the actual album.
I have the Nolly suite of the Neural DSP thing.
I'm pretty
And
sure
it
it's
is
not. I'm pretty sure it's not the actual Nolly suite that they used on it. It's Nolly that mixed the album,
right.
but it's I'm pretty sure Rory said it's neural DSPs, but I can't remember which one he said. Might have been the Fortin one, for the rhythm guitars.
I've got the Fortin Cali.
I think
I
it
mean,
might.
if he's using Neural DS, I mean, it might not have been out at that point. I think I got it like maybe 18 months ago, and I think it had just come out at that point, so they may not have had it yet. But it's one of the better. The Nolly one is one of the better ones, especially for like heavy metal.
I know they're neural DSP artists, so they get licenses for all of the stuff.
Yeah,
So they have access to it all, and they're using the Quad Cortex Live now as well.
yeah.
All of them. So there's no. I don't even think they have cabs on stage anymore.
Loads of people are doing that, aren't they? That's the thing.
Yeah. So he's going to be mixing it and mastering it and tracking drums, and then we'll do the rest ourselves, and then we'll just go there. But our bass player Ricky, he can record as well. He's actually recorded engineered albums from his other bands, so he's quite good at it as well. I think he's probably going to produce the vocals, maybe more so than me, because he can do vocals as well and has done like heavy vocals on albums. So I think he'd be better at like producing Ross's voice, because he'd know if his voice is on it or not on it, more than I would.
Yeah.
I've done a lot. I've done the vocal tracking for all the demos, like regularly as we're writing. I'll track with Ross, but it's more just so we can bounce ideas back and forth and see if vocals changes any of the guitar parts. Some of the leads might be clashing or stuff like that, or we might hear ideas as we're going. Yeah, I won't be mixing it. Don't feel confident enough yet. I think what I will do though is after we have it mixed, I'll probably use those mixes as reference points for me to keep doing mixes to try and aspire to getting somewhere near that.
Yeah.
I'd probably be able to use that, like, because obviously I'll have exactly the same source material that he's going to have. So I'll hope to do that. But I never had a massive interest in recording. My first experience with recording was actually in a proper studio, and it was one of the biggest eye openers I've ever had in my life. I had no idea what to expect. I was about 17, maybe, my first band, and this is back in Ireland. We didn't know like anything about having to use click tracks or any of that, so we had none of that. So we went in and everything was raw, and I can remember having to play guitar all day for every drum take, and it wasn't like there was no like fixing anything back then. I think it was done to DAT. I think it was.
Yeah, DAT tapes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can remember it being like you'd do the track and then you'd see if there was any parts you want. So you could punch in and fix bits. But I can remember having to play guitar like pretty much all day, because while the drums has been done, and then have to do guitars afterwards. And we done it 2 years in a row. We done 2 EPs, and I remember the first one. Obviously, we had no idea what we were doing, so we done it like one song at a time. So we'd do the drums for that, then do the guitars, then do the bass, and it went like that. And following year, I thought that was a bit, maybe not the most efficient way to work, so we should do all the drums first and then all the guitars first and do it that way. Which, yeah, it was more efficient, but I then had to play guitar non-stop for about 10 hours for a whole weekend. So I had to play for all of the drum tracking, like every time, and then all the guitars for the stuff as well. I've never played guitar so much in 2 days ever. I'm coming back from the first night, been in so much pain. It was unbelievable from playing all day. Like every part of me was sore. That was an experience. So that was why I learned like definitely click tracks were a must. 'Cause I can remember having some serious problems with parts of the songs where there was ring outs, like not having counts and things, or trying to put counts in and then trying to get them out afterwards. It was an absolute nightmare. I mean, the guy at the studio was quite, for the time, quite well kitted out, but in hindsight, I don't know how good he was with it either. I think
quick anecdote. So you know Sweet Child of Mine, how it starts with 8 bars of Slash doing the Sweet Child of Mine riff.
Yeah.
They never recorded a count in for it. So what you're hearing when you listen to Appetite for Destruction, the actual take, Slash had to start playing randomly, and he had to do it like 100 times and hope it was going to line up. So they'd just roll
Yeah.
tape. He'd start playing roughly when he thought it was going to be 8 bars before the drums came in, and finally they got it right. So the take you hear on the album is the one they got it right on. But imagine doing that and not recording a fucking count in on.
I had to do that. I had to do that
Yeah.
because there was parts like that, and you had to keep counting it in your head and hope that the timing as the drums was stopping, that count
Hey.
stayed is perfect. And it was like, and then you'd get it and you think you almost had it, and then it would be like the tiniest bit out, and you just have to keep doing that until you eventually got lucky, basically. And it was
It's so weird now that with like Pro Tools, that's like
Yeah,
10 seconds to fix.
it's mental,
like,
isn't it?
cut it and then just move it.
It's absolutely crazy how much the technology has changed that. It does make you more aware of stuff, maybe by getting it right.
Yeah.
Or being prepared. That's the one thing it made me think is like being prepared is like almost all of the battle now. Like you need to know your parts and have everything synced. But the second year too, we had no click track either because the drummer still refused to use one. So it was exactly the same. It wasn't so much the same shit. We were more aware like to put counts in. And I was maybe more aware of like to not leave such ring outs as long and stuff like that, so that I could try and be a little bit step ahead of him to make it easier for me. But yeah. So this, yeah. So that was my first experience with recording. Was actually in proper studio, having zero clue what we were doing or what to expect, and like it being not an enjoyable experience at all. I don't know if that might have maybe. I do regret that I didn't get into it a lot sooner. I think it definitely, I think I've got a lot better, not just as for writing in the last few years, but also as for playing, because when you're tracking guitar all the time, you can even see from the transients if they're not lining up right. And I tend to not punch in, like I'll often record stuff in sections now, but I'll do like, if I make a mistake, I'll just do that whole riff again. And then I'm quad tracking. So I think I've got tighter and tighter and tighter in the last few years just from doing that. But I think like having access to recording, I wouldn't nearly recommend someone now, like if they were maybe not quite complete, exactly starting out, but very quickly, like everyone has some sort of laptop or things now that they can record on, and things like just get a decent interface, and even Reaper, which you can get for free, and just start recording yourself early. The access to that now and how cheap it is, it's maybe more beneficial now than doing that and just getting a good VST than it is buying a practice amp.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so I've been teaching. I have taught in the last few years and very young. But I think like anyone would be in the teens on this anyway, so you don't even have to be that tech savvy, but any sort of a computer at all. And you can pick up interfaces nowadays, really good ones for less than practice amps. And then you can get VSTs for free. Like
we bought an interface recently just so we could rig up backing tracks for the band, and it's a reasonable. It's like a 2-track. What is it? I can't remember what it is now, but it's a Motu, I think, and it's like it was 50 quid, and I could use that happily to record on, no problem.
Yeah.
I had a couple of Focusrite, the 2-channel one, but I switched to an Audient Evo 8, I think.
They're all good now. That's the thing. Is that there aren't really any bad ones anymore.
Yeah, like apparently the preamps in a lot of these ones is the same as the ones in the big full ones. There's just not as many channels. But the Focusrite, I found reamping was going to be a problem with it because there wasn't enough things on the back. You would have had to take out one of your monitors, to reamp. So my bass player Ricky had the Evo 8, and I looked into that, so I got that. It's really small. It's like a little brick, and you can reamp with that and all that. And I actually got Grant to build me a reamp box, funnily enough. Grant's someone that builds pedals that myself and Helmut know as well, and it's great for custom stuff because if you can't decide what you need to buy, you just ask Grant, can you make one for you? That's what I do. It's just easier. It's like, Grant, I need to buy this, or this. What do you recommend? And could you just build me one? And it's like, yeah, how much? Sorted. Send him the money, and then 2 weeks later you get it. So it's
decent.
Well, the truth is that he'll first diss the shit that's out there, and then he'll say he'll just build a better one, and then he does.
Yeah. He'll tell you all the pitfalls. Like you can even just ask him a question and like just expect he'll give you a yes or no answer. But he'll come back to you with an essay.
Yeah.
Like he has to go and research it, and you're like, I haven't got a clue what any of that means, but can you make me that? Yep, no problem. And it's 2 weeks later, it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how I got a reamp box, because I wasn't quite sure which one to get, so I just got him to build me one.
You know what's funny though? So there's like this duality, isn't there, at the moment, with people saying like, I'm just gonna. You said it yourself. I might just use VSTs, or I might reamp some stuff, and it's like, well, it's an interesting. It raises an interesting question, because I mean, just lately, as I mentioned on the last one, I'm actually moving away from using VSTs, because I find they screw with my workflow too much, make things a little bit too easy, and they sort of, I don't know. There's something aesthetic about it that doesn't really work for me, but I think, but it's interesting that while the people kind of record in such a way that they would use VSTs for their amp sound, they also leave themselves the option of putting it through an amp later,
Yeah.
which I think is an interesting approach. I think that the thing is, I think crucially both methods obviously leave you the option of changing your mind later about how something sounds, and I think that's basically something you can do nowadays with basically anything but, like vocals and like acoustic instruments. Anything that produces the sound itself. You know what I mean? Anything electrical, you can basically these days just decide. You can just record a dry track and then decide how you want it to sound when you're mixing it, and you don't even have to worry about it. And it's like,
It's funny that I have the other 2 notes Captor X's.
yeah.
I've got one of those as well. So I
Yeah.
am toying with the idea of actually recording with dual rectifier. I can take 2 lines out of the back of the 2 notes, so I can have one with an IR and one with no IR at all. So I can even change that in post. So again, that's options again, but using the tube. But then I could
Yeah.
even split the signal, so I'm taking the DI as well off that.
So
that'd leave.
it's something you mentioned about sort of playing guitar and so on, and the fact that you try not to punch in too much and that kind of thing. So, I mean, Helmut, you asked like, all of that time that I spent sort of, making garbage with garbage, is that it must have been at least a valuable learning experience. I think probably the thing I learned the most out of it was because most of the equipment I was using didn't have the option to sort of punch in or to do things in sections or anything. At least it just wasn't practical, at least until I started recording everything into a computer. But I was using tape machines. It's like I couldn't afford to get the little pedal that you need to connect to the 8-track to punch in. I would have had to do it manually, but because I was playing guitar, I couldn't do it. So I had to, if I was going to record a guitar for a track, I had to record the whole song in one go.
Yeah.
So I had to learn how to do that. So every take was like fully committed, and obviously I was just recording the sound of the shitty amp I had at the time, so that was committed as well. So I had to make that sound as good as possible. And I think that's the thing. Sorry, go on.
There you go. We done a similar thing with the very first Blood Thread EP. The guy that recorded us got us to do like 4 takes of each song each, and then he would piece together the best bits of it.
Yeah.
And then on the next EP, he realized that was probably an overly ridiculous amount of work for him. So then we done it in sections and got it right.
It's about the result, though, isn't it? Because it's like it's a
Yeah.
common thing to do with vocals. It's like you do 4 or 5 vocal takes, and then you comp them. You just take the best bits of each vocal take, rather than recording one line at a time, which is one way of doing it. But the problem is that it comes down to sort of the art of the thing, and it's one of the things that sort of one of the things we're going to discuss is whether we have an artistic philosophy when it comes to recording, or whether we just see it as a utilitarian process in terms of getting stuff onto the. And what I was saying about like trying to not use guitar VSTs is that to me that's more in the camp of it being a utilitarian exercise, and I'm trying to drive more back towards the kind of, I guess, the Jack Black school of recording, where everything literally, I mean, if he could, he'd record everything straight to vinyl. You know what I mean? And I think I kind of want to go more down that road, take more risks, and hopefully that will sort of make the music a little bit better. And it'll also prevent me from being too much of a perfectionist, which is one of my downfalls. One of the things I've sort of inherited from all this tinkering is that I've become like obsessive about tweaking stuff. I will spend hours and hours and hours just changing one EQ setting by 1 dB, and then undo the whole thing at the end of it because it hasn't actually made a difference.
It's
yeah,
a phrase in German, like I've cut twice and it's still too short.
Yes, yeah, that's how it feels. That's always how it feels. It's like I might as well not have. You undo all the changes you made, and somehow it's better.
Yeah.
But everything you've done has just made it worse than it was to begin with.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get to.
It's kind of same in the right.
So go on.
It's kind of same in the writing process too, though, isn't it? You need to know when the song is done. You could just keep changing stuff just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
carry on.
No, there's a saying I really like, which is art is never finished. It's only ever abandoned.
Yeah.
So you just have to pick a point and go, okay, I'm not going to do anything else to it, and there it is. But it's like you could keep going. You could always keep going. At the the Mona Lisa might have ended up with like glasses and a hat, if he had kept going, but decided to stop.
Yeah. Okay, so for me it was my story is very similar to yours, Max. It's like, man, so similar, it's unbelievable. But one of the reasons why I suppose why a lot of people end up recording is because that's the only way you can record stuff if you do it yourself. Especially in the past, studios were too expensive, the gear didn't really exist, you name it. And then as digital technology kind of came about, and I think the real jump was when we could buy fairly affordable interfaces, either Firewire, because remember the first ones were Firewire, but when they became USB interfaces, I think that was really where you suddenly could say, well, okay, because at the same time the prices also dropped. But my history is very much the same. We went into a recording studio with the first band I had. I'm talking about 97, 98 maybe, or something like that. And we ended up in a local guy's studio, and he was a guy, we didn't realize this, obviously, because we were noobs. But he was a guy that basically recorded all these kind of local, traditional, kind of, I'm going to say country type stuff, right? Very small studio. And he did not get what we were doing, because he always recorded like traditional music, and we came in with grunge. He just didn't get that concept of the differences in where the emphasis sits on those music. I mean, our emphasis was on the drums and the guitars. Fuck the vocals, right? But he was like, no, the vocals were like this massively loud, and everything else was just kind of in the background. So that was a fuck up.
Yeah.
Then we went to a guy who, again, has a very small studio, but he's like one of the main guys that any metal band or grunge band went to in South Africa at the time. And he did a great job of everyone. So we actually spent the money with him. And we were surely happy. But obviously, when we went there, our mouths were open. Like the whole process, the first time that the whole process takes shape. For example, the guy sat down and he started intonating my guitar. And I had a Ibanez Gem kind of stylish Floyd Rose one. But then when I moved here, and I didn't have a band, and I just had all this stuff written, I ended up trying to record in all sorts of different ways in my shitty little flat. And then we got there was a guy doing some recording here, and we tried him, and that was also terrible because the guitar sound was so bad, and I just abandoned it because I still don't know why the guitar sounded so bad, because it was an SM58 at the speaker, and it definitely didn't record, you know, what the speaker was producing. That's for sure. So I went down the
Yeah.
same route. I bought one of those 8-track recorders, the CD ones. Well, it didn't record to CD, it obviously recorded to a hard disk, but you can then do the whole production. It's the 900, the Beast. Was it the Boss, or what was it?
Yeah, that's what I had. Yeah,
Yeah.
a BR 900. Yeah.
Apparently, like
That-
Damien Rice recorded his first album on one of those things.
I mean, if you
So-
have 8 tracks, you can really do a half decent job, because every track has all the things that you need to have decently kind of compress and EQ and reverb and everything that you need to do. But
Yeah.
what happened was we had 8 songs, and the drummer suddenly threw it on me that he's gonna leave the country again. He was a Finnish guy, and I said, no, before you go, we need to get the drums recorded. So I bought, on my credit card, I put the fucking recording machine and one of those drum miking kits, and we just went into the studio and we just hashed it out. And so I had all 8 on the drum machine, and then I had to start mixing the drums and bounce them, and then start with the guitars and all that shit. Man, it took ages. And I was in the flat at the time, so I had one of these massive PV stereo chorus, I think it was. You know that
Yeah,
It's this
I had one of
fucking
those.
beast of a thing. I mean, you just look at it and the wall shakes. So, but I was trying to record. I was trying to mic it up and everything, but I just couldn't, because it was just too loud. So I used its internal amp simulations of the time. I still have those
Yeah.
recordings. They're actually not too bad. But it's this mess of having to running out of tracks the whole time, and having to like bounce,
Yeah.
and then bounce again to open up new tracks. Fuck, it was a nightmare. Took ages, but I was, at the time at least, I was happy with it. And then soon after that, I bought a DAW, and it was called, they're still around, N-Track Studio, and I still think it's actually a really good one. And it's a guy in Italy who wrote the whole fucking thing himself, and it's a really, really good DAW. And he also wrote a lot of plugins for it. But what I liked the most about it was that the workflow was really, really similar to working with tape. So the whole way that you know what it reminds me of? Mixbus. You know that DAW?
No.
Mixbus Studio, and it's kind of modeled on the SSL. No, it's modeled on the Mix something. I can't remember, but it's modeled and trying to recreate a famous desk, and the warmth of the channels when you're compressing them and everything. It's really, really nice. I was tempted to use it this time on this album because I've got a copy of it, but it reminded me a lot more of the whole kind of analog workflow, just purely by the way he designed it. And the other thing that was really fucking interesting about it was that if there was a blip or a click or a bop on your WAV file, you could zoom in all the way on the WAV file, and the bits actually had dots on it that you can then drag and pull.
Yeah.
So you can literally edit the WAV file on the bit level, which I found really interesting. I'm talking about must have been 2004 or something.
Yeah, that's pretty advanced for 2004.
It was amazing, and I did quite a few things on that. The reason I stopped using it is because, and I think this was partly his fault, in the sense that he was so busy trying to develop the software that the whole licensing issue with the way that you can upgrade it and stuff like that was becoming really fucked up. And I just had enough of it. Certain stuff was just stopping working and so on. I've every now and then, every couple of years, I kind of look at it again and just see, what he's up to. But I thought that was a really good DAW. That was the other problem with it. The whole interface ran on OpenGL. OpenGL is like a game engine type rendering.
Yeah.
And that caused a few problems depending on your machine and your graphics card. But I don't know if that's solved yet, because I might be talking shite now. The new versions might have all been solved. So there were just things that didn't render properly. So like suddenly buttons would disappear, or your WAV file wouldn't come up properly. But part of the reason that I came into recording is because I always have to do everything myself. The moment I see something or touch something or involved with something, I go like, I can do this, and I just want to do it. You know what I mean? It's just my terrible nature.
Yeah, I'm the same.
And because I guess I always hate being in that situation where I say, okay, we'll have somebody else do it. We'll pay them the money. And then you do all the effort, you pay them the money, and then you're not happy, and you think, fuck, I'd rather fuck it up myself than pay somebody else, and I'm not 100% happy. I mean...
It's also because I really like criticizing things, and there's always that guy who says, oh yeah, well, you think you can do any better? And I always want to be able to say, yeah, actually, yeah, I can do better.
Give me 2 minutes. Well, I mean, I've done quite a lot of stuff over the last few years, and I am not 100% happy with any of it, but I'm happy enough with it. We're basically, tomorrow night the guys are going to come around and we're going to do a final check through. There's the odd little thing here and there that we've noticed, but overall we're pretty much done recording and mixing. And it's far from some polished Hollywood presentation, but I am super happy with it. It does all the things I wanted it to do, which is fucking growl in your face, and that's it. Just full on. There's no, nothing in it is attempting to be subtle or polished, but everything is clear. Everything sits. The low end sits. It's all there. So I suppose over time, I suppose the other problem is that I've never really liked overly polished productions. I see the necessity of it in certain music, and I think I didn't want to interrupt Peter when he was talking, but a lot of the things that you were saying, Peter, was like, when it comes to reamping and are you going to use DI or VST, I think it really all depends on the type of music that you want to bring out, and also what part of that music is actually important to you, right? So is it the energy, or is it clarity, or is it, there are so many aesthetic decisions that I believe, in my opinion, should come first before you get to what technology you're going to be using to actually get to that point. So at Max, you were saying you're going back to using amps, and you want to produce with amps only because it actually limits you to a certain degree, right? You've got that one thing that you can do with that amp. You can change it, kind of like when you're recording drums. It's kind of done. You can maybe EQ it a bit, but you can't change the overall tone of it.
Yeah, it brings the decision-making process forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's it. That's the idea.
And I think that part of that really influences... let me rephrase that. The lack of understanding where you want to get to creates this necessity for all this, for all the options that digital brings us.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm not criticizing anything, because I find what we did with this recording was really interesting. Like everything before, I kind of did all myself, and I kind of knew where I was going, but this time we actually made a lot of decisions in the jam room. The sound of the bass, where the bass sits, how loud the bass is going to be, what kind of guitar tone we're after, even how much reverb we want in certain sections. The only thing we couldn't decide in the drum room or in the jam room was actually what the drums were going to be sounding like, because I wanted the drums to be a little bit kind of lower tuned, you know. And obviously that's not something you can do with the kit that sits in the jam rooms, you know. You kind of have what you have. But with that in mind, it meant that when we did do the drums, and I started mixing them, because we did it through an electronic drum kit, it meant that you can go in afterwards. Ironically, that's the one thing we did actually mess with the tuning of was the drum kit this time, and not the guitars, because we kind of knew they were going to be fine. So we did the drums to a degree, then we did the guitar, then we did the bass, and then we made sure that the bass and the guitar sit together, and then we went back to the drums to kind of get them in the right kind of, I'm gonna say, mood. You know what I mean? It's like a mood rather than a sound, and I think it worked out really well. If we had to get to the same conclusion in a studio, we would definitely have spent 2 days choosing drum kits and toms and snares and different skins and tuning and detuning drums and whatever, for sure, if we wanted to try and get to that same kind of feeling.
Well, it's interesting because it's like a lot of the process of keeping that decision making open ended that all this technology affords us, it removes the necessity for a lot of what used to be referred to as pre-production, where all of those decisions, they were made not just like while you were recording, they were actually made like several weeks before you were recording.
Yeah.
Everything, because it was so expensive, like, you know, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to go into a studio, that you couldn't afford to waste a minute. You know, sort of, are we going to do A, or are we going to do B? Are we going to do C? Or maybe we could do D. You couldn't do that. So you had to, for most bands, unless you were some giant band that could spend 6 months in a recording studio, most bands were in a situation where they had to get in and get out. So they had to know exactly what they were going to be doing. So they spent weeks in their rehearsal space before then, like hammering out every little detail, and a lot of, you know, probably with the producer, you know, and part of that would be like, okay, we're going to use this kit for this song, you know, we're going to use this snare on this thing, you know, like hammering all that kind of stuff out. And it's like, it's you know, it's probably, you know, during that process that they decided what snare they were going to use on Saint Anger. You know,
they used the snare on Saint Anger, did they?
You know what I mean? They're just like, oh, here's this biscuit tin, lads. Use this biscuit tin. But I mean, so
that biscuit tin is worth a lot of money now.
Yeah, absolutely, right. I don't know. I quite like it, but I'm like the one guy who does. But yeah. So I think that's the thing, and I think it's like I you know, obviously because now it's kind of, the cost of it is moot, and you know, you can kind of take as long as you need to, and you can spend as long as you want to on the recording process, because you're not being billed. Most people who make records now are not paying by the hour to make those records. You know, you can kind of go on, and that comes down to why I want to try and take. It's not just getting rid of amp VSTs that I'm talking about in you know, in my particular case. It's trying to sort of clamp down on all of those things that sort of, give me the freedom to not have to kind of, in a lot of cases, to not have to do the work. And I think that's kind of where I find myself. I used to be very, very prolific, because I used to be able to just write a song, record it, and move on to the next song. And now I find that I don't do that, because it's like I could spend 6 months on this song. So I do. It's like I never have to actually decide. When we're talking about like, when is art finished? If you don't, if you're at a point where it's like, well, if I want to change the sound of that amplifier, I literally have to re-record all the guitars. Then that's a reason to not re-record all the guitars, isn't it? But it's like, so you're stuck with that amp sound. Yeah, so if you have the option of making those decisions, that kind of I feel like it just slows you down.
But there are different philosophies to this sort of thing, and that is like the one is be creative, get stuff down, get it out. The other one is it has to be 100% perfect, and there's no right or wrong. There is only what you prefer.
Yeah, it is a preference, isn't it? There really isn't such a, as far as art's concerned, at least, there isn't such a thing as perfect. There's degrees of quality. There's like, it's good. There's probably like, for every sound, there's an extreme where everyone agrees it sounds like garbage. And then there's probably another extreme where 99% of people go, well, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of territory in between where some guy might go, I love that. And some other guy might go, well, I hate it. Lars is just good. But it's like,
we actually have a kind of an example of where you could compare two of these things. Nevermind and In Utero.
Yeah.
Where you have one where you have this, even for the music, forget about what kind of music it was, but there was this attempt at radio-friendly perfection, and the other one was like, nah, back to, I'm going to say roots, but not really roots, but something more fluid and dynamic. The problem with me is I enjoy both. I enjoyed both.
Albini, wasn't it? Yeah, they hired Steve Albini specifically because he said he wasn't going to make something radio friendly for them. He said he refused to do it.
I think they chose him more for the fact that he is a recording engineer, not a producer, which he always says is like, I record what you want me to record. I make sure that you sound the way you want to sound, and not, all right, I'm just the producer, man. I think we should do this, and this.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a good.
Well, actually,
sorry.
No, go on. There's actually a good example with Metallica as well, and it's not Saint Anger, ironically. It's Ride the Lightning, isn't it? Because the original mix of that album basically didn't have any bass on it. The bass guitar was inaudible.
It's not Injustice for All. So
Justice for All. I think you're right. It's Justice. Yeah. Sorry, my mistake. And so, but I think since then haven't they remixed it, like turned the bass up. And I kind of like feel like, I mean, I haven't actually heard the remix of it, and I'm not that interested in it. But it's kind of like, it's one of those things where I sort of that to me goes down. It's sort of like they're kind of George Lucasing their old albums, when he started putting like CGI Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah.
Open stuff. It's just like, well, it was what it was, and maybe you, instead of spending the time changing stuff from 25 years ago, it's like, we'll just leave it the way it is, because it's like it is what it is. Yeah.
But to be fair, Metallica have never been ones to miss an opportunity to rinse their fan base out of more money.
That's a fair comment.
Ultimately, that's what it's about. They don't give a shit if it sounds better or worse. Buys them time until they do the Garage Inc. 2 or S&M 3, doesn't it?
There's probably part of them that's like an ego thing that every time someone points out that they put out an album with no bass on it, you know, they probably get angry and sort of, you know, want the opportunity to make people stop saying that.
Yeah, but
You know.
they seem to live in a bubble surrounded by yes men. So I don't know if there's anyone close enough that would tell them that.
Yeah.
But the last productions have been a bit questionable. Never mind the songs, but the production are like, it's weird because they're such a big band. You would imagine that there would be catches for this. I mean, this last one, for example, is so over tinny and so overly pushed that it doesn't sound good. When Death Magnetic came out, there was massive amount of people complaining that it's clipping all the time.
Yeah. Clip the fuck.
So I mean, how can this happen?
Okay, so I have a theory on this, and I have a theory that you know, because I hear a lot of modern stuff come out and not sound very good. And to be fair, I do most of my music listening on studio monitors, so I hear very, very clearly what's going on. But the truth is that most people listen to music now on their phones, and music has to be mixed and mastered in a very specific way to sound good on phones. And that way is different to how it needs to be mixed and mastered to sound good on a stereo system, which most people don't own anymore. You know, if people have some kind of stereo, it's usually one of them little Alexa speakers or whatever in their house, or some kind of sound bar on their TV or something like that. You know, maybe they might.
You just opened a massive fucking can of worms with this comment.
Yeah.
Because you're 100% correct. But considering that we're talking about production, this is actually a massive question mark. Because there's no chance that you can mix for everything. That you can't. You have to, if you did that, you literally have to mix a separate mix and master for every single thing that somebody might listen to. And then you would have
I've heard of bands having to do different mixes and different masters for vinyls.
No, the vinyls is a known issue, and it's always been. That's not a problem. In fact, the vinyls have always had a specific curve to them. And usually what happens is that even in the past, that would happen is that you would have a good mix, and that mix would go to the vinyl guys. The vinyls would then remaster it specifically for vinyl and bring it out. It was not a mix question, it was a mastering question.
Mastering, yeah.
And it was basically just, in a sense, it was just dropping a lot of low end and more and getting more high end, kind of like putting an overall kind of line through the EQ. But I honestly, happily being stubborn, I mix for good speakers and a good reproduction system, because any asshole who fucking listens to his music collection on a phone speaker should not be listening to music at all, because I don't see the point. I just don't see the point. No matter how good you mix or master, that is an absolute waste of music.
I mean, they can listen to music, but I just, on principle, I won't make decisions based on that guy's opinion. That's the thing. It's like, if music sounds bad through your phone, then yeah, because you're listening to it on a fucking phone. Get some good speakers, and then the music will sound good. That's my approach. It's like, there's this interview with Ólafur Arnalds, who's like this Icelandic kind of neoclassical. He writes a lot of soundtracks and stuff. He did the soundtrack for Broadchurch. Anyway. And Christian Henson from Spitfire Audio is in his studio. They're doing like a studio tour, and he's talking about his studio monitors, and he's saying, I see you don't have any, like, you know, Yamaha NS10s, right? And he's like, yeah, I just don't see the point, you know, because it's like, why would you listen to your music on shit speakers? And it's one of those interesting paradigms that keeps coming up and up and up. Like, should you have the Grot box speakers in your studio to listen to there's the argument they don't have any bass extension and they don't have a particularly good high end, and what that does is it makes you be able to hear the mid-range picture more clearly, because the mid-range is the most important part of your mix and all that kind of stuff. And I just like, I've had NS10s and I've had other bad speakers, and I've had other speakers that, there's like the little aura tones, the little boxes, the tiny little boxy speakers that just sit on your, I've mixed in mono and all that kind of shit. And it's just like, put the effort into that. It just doesn't seem to add any benefit. At the end of the thing, it's just like, you still want your mix to sound good on good speakers. And it's like, it maybe there's some kind of art to it that I don't know, or some kind of technique that I'm not aware of, but it just, all it does to me, it just seems like a kind of it just seems like a pose, to be honest, to have because people used to have NS10s on their monitor, on their meter bridge. So now you have to have NS10s on your meter bridge to look the part. Well, but I've had, and I used them, and I don't see the point of these fucking things.
Well, I've done nearly every mix that I've done. Before I put them out, I have listened to the mixes and my version of the master on as many different sources as I can, to see if there's anything glaringly wrong. Like you quickly notice low end issues,
stereo,
or
the car's a good one,
or a screechy top end. You kind of notice that quickly on certain devices if it's too much. But I've noticed that if your mix is fairly well balanced, it actually plays half decently on pretty much anything. Earphones, car, even on the speaker of your phone, or through a TV, or through one of the the TV, what do you call them, the sound bars and stuff like that. Because what all these devices do, they have their own internal mechanisms to and EQ curves and jiggly jangly magic bits to try and make sure that the music sounds good. So as long as the stuff is properly balanced and properly sound all clear, you're kind of okay. You're kind of there to start with. There's a lot of kind of, I mean, I can't even say this, but realistically, a lot of it has to do with the user education. Like, I noticed in the car, I could hardly hear the guitars in this last mix, and there was and the previous single, it was as if the whole upper mid range was just peaking. And then I realized the other night that actually it was my phone. For some reason, the EQ on my phone was set to in a ridiculous way. It wasn't even the mix or anything like that. So the people actually pay some sort of attention to the settings on their playback devices. Is maybe, I mean, it's impossible. It's a stupid. That's what I'm saying. It's like stupid to even mention, because you can't expect that.
It's not stupid because it's like this is the interesting thing, and so much of this comes down to it because it is the sort of the technical aspect of the art, isn't it? I'll just say this last thing before I have to run away for like 30 seconds. I'll be right back. But I think so much of like what I've been thinking about, and not just like production, but like the making YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff, comes down to like how much of your decision making should be based on the concept that the people who are going to consume what you're producing don't understand it properly. Open-ended question. I'll be right back.
That is pretty open-ended. I'm not even sure if I understood it correctly. Well, I think while he's away, because I don't know how to answer that. How do we define our approach to recording? Do we have an artistic philosophy, or is it just an utilitarian exercise? Actually, I find this question best suited to you anyway, Peter, because I think you pretty much know what you want from your recording, and so far you have pretty much used mixers and recording studios to record the stuff that you've been involved in.
Yeah.
So that must mean that you have had some sort of idea or vision going into it and what you expect coming out of it.
Yeah, like the two Blood Thread EPs, we've done a lot of research into who we got to record it and mix it. You know, that we didn't just blindly go with someone. We knew we could get that he could get us what we wanted. Yeah, I do have a vision. I think maybe the type of music I play is quite, there's an awful lot going on all of the time
Yeah.
and precision to it. So maybe like, whereas yourself, you'd be more with that looser kind of feel. Maybe the guitar tone, sound of it, like subtle differences, is going to sound more bigger differences in your music, if that makes any sense, because it maybe breathes a bit more.
Yeah.
I'm done tone chasing. Like, I'm completely fucking done tone chasing. For years it was like the 6505 and trying all sorts of different pedals and constantly tweaking stuff. And even when and then now it's the dual rec, but I'm done with that. I can't see me changing to another amp now because that gives me more clarity and more options. Just I've I have a clean is actually good, a crunch, and then the really heavy one. But see, even with the VSTs, I just have one or two that I like, and some IRs that I like, and I have when I'm writing, I have like a template made. So when I start a new project, I just pull up the template and I have the four rhythm tracks already there and all the IRs and things. So with the tone chasing thing, I'm completely done with it now. It's just about getting the music, working on that. And I don't know if it's because of how quite technical it can be. I'm going to spend way more time working on the technique and being able to play it properly than spending half an hour trying to get the guitar tone picked all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't really, it's not as big a factor for me as it would be. Like, I don't obsess over a guitar tone anymore like I used to do, or constantly tweaking it and, like hearing tiny subtle differences that only I can hear or I think I can hear. And I ended up going back to the Tube Screamer as a boost. I know that really annoyed you. But and it was for no other reason that when I started playing the dual rectifier, I got a load of boost pedals and I tried them all out, and that was the one that sounded the best. I went back to the one that worked the best for that amp, but it doesn't work as well for the other amp. It's funny how different ones work. But yeah, with the tone chasing, I can have an artistic vision for the song now or the overall picture, but like I'm not that fussed about the nitty gritty, so the tones and things as much as I used to be.
Well, I think above a certain, once you get to a certain tone and you're happy with it, the rest really is just nitpicking. Once it's good, it's good.
Yeah.
And it works.
Like, see, I think too, this type of music, like, see the sort of stuff you play is kind of slower and doomier. If you're using, say, an orange, that's going to give you a specific kind of vibe that you might want.
Yeah.
Or you might use something like Friedman or something that give you that more harshly based. And maybe because the type of stuff I play, it's so very percussive and fast. It maybe narrows down that, like, certain amps aren't going to work as much or give me that kind of. You know what I mean? A tone's not as. It needs to just sound tight and articulate rather than too much of the other stuff.
Funny you
I don't
mentioned
think
Orange and Friedman, because that's pretty much the two VSTs, Orange and the Friedman, that I've pretty much used in this most of the time. And it has to do with character. It's not really a tone that I'm chasing. It's a character of a tone. It's where does the punch sit? Where does the growl sit? Does it sit near the bottom end? Does it sit near the top? Does it have too much fizz? These are the kind of things. It's not really about a specific tone. It's more like a character, Does it shake? Does it shake? Does it sound like it's a bass on certain places? So yeah, I do think, but that's kind of why I said, like, when you play what you play and you've got a dual rectifier and a good boost and a decent cab, you pretty much sorted. You kind of can't go wrong.
It's funny. It's funny we talk about VSTs, right? For years I was using still have it, a 6505 PV, and when I first started using VSTs, I bought the what is it again? It's an STL Tones Will Putney, and the 4 amps in it are a PV 5150 6505, same amp, a diesel Essa Boogie triple crown, and I think it's a Bogner Ubershell. Yeah. I thought like, I'll be just using the 5150 one because that's the amp I have, and I
Yeah.
hated it the most out of the four.
Can I
And
just say, my guitar player has a 5150, a block letter one, and a 6505. They're not the same amp at all. Completely different.
yeah, it's funny how you hear varying things on that. But then
Yeah.
the block letter sounds different to the Mark II, the script one as well.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
The
Yeah,
60,
yeah.
the
And
6505, it's something to do with the with the transformer or something, wasn't it? PV's come out and said recently that at some point the supplier started giving them different transformers and they didn't know.
yeah, I think it's broader than that. I mean, if you put them side by side, and we have done, they are just. I mean, I've had both of them in here, and we've A/B'd them because we were recording with them, and honestly, it's like I mean, they're similar in the sense that I mean, they're closer to each other than the 5150 is to a Dumble, right? But I mean, at the same time, it's like there's enough differences between them. It's like the difference between, say, uh, it's the difference between a JCM 800 and a JCM 900. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
people wouldn't say that those are the same amplifiers. And they're very similar, but they're just not the same. And I think that's really the crux of it. So yeah, yeah.
It's funny, I actually can't stand it now. 6505, it's weird. I don't know what it is. It's like when I started using the VST of it, it's like I was hearing things that I didn't like. And then when I started jamming with the real deal again, I'm now hearing them in and I don't know if it's just I've become more
It's
aware of it or whether it needs a service.
all of those amps. I don't think it's that it needs a service. It's that those amps produce a sound that is not only fatiguing to listen to in the short term, because if you listen to a whole album that's been recorded on a 5150, by the end of it, you want silence for a couple of hours because your ears are like, okay, that's enough, because it's so mid forward, right? It's so kind of barky and kind of it has that kind of very, very kind of, it's not fizz, it's like a different type of thing, but it's got this very sort of high mid range presence. Um, and yeah, it's like and the other thing is it's quite sort of but sorry, in the longer term, it's a sound that you get used to, and then once you get used to it, it becomes a little boring because they are ultimately quite one-dimensional
Oh
amplifiers.
yeah, very very much so. Yeah, like the different boosts I was trying with that, the differences is fairly minimal, but with the dual rec, it's like night and day. Like whatever boost pedal you use with that amp makes it sound massively different, like different amps. But the
Yeah.
PV is just ever so slight variations of the same thing, no matter what boost you use on it, really.
Mm.
From my experience, but I just don't use it anymore.
I've never found a 5150, 6505, whatever amp sim that actually sounds like it properly.
Well, the Nolly, the Neural DSP Nolly Amp 2 is very, very close. It's based on that, and I think probably Nolly and Neural DSP are the people capable of getting it the closest, and they've done that particular VST does do a remarkably close version to it. It's still nothing like playing the actual amp, but sort of sonically, it has sort of
Yeah.
very similar characteristics.
The one I do like is the one the free one from Fluff. That what was it called?
ML Sound Labs.
Yeah, the Sound Labs one, and that's based on it as well. It's kind of a rough base on it. It's not even exactly. I like that one. That was pretty good. I like the sound of that one. Right, we're lost again. Where are we?
A sidetrack there.
Yeah.
Well, I came back in. You guys were talking about tone. I just want to kind of pick up on that because tone's a very broad. Tone doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
In and of itself, does it? It's like when we talk about tone chasing, because you were talking about the kind of tone chasing that you're doing, Peter, and I think it's very different to kind of like the tone chasing that like John Mayer would do, for instance, because you're looking for different things, aren't you? You're looking for kind of a response and a kind of an EQ curve and a way that it fills out the mix. I think to sort of drag it a bit closer to like our central subject, I would also say that there's a lot to be said about the fact that guitar tones that sound good, when you're playing your guitar into the amp and you're like, yeah, that sounds fucking great. Quite often those are tones that don't work at all in a studio context. Yeah. And the tones that you end up hearing on a recording, if you put them in isolation, you're like, God, that sounds fucking horrible. But when you put it in the mix, it's like, no, it makes sense.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard that said. I've heard that said a lot about the orange cabs. You see a lot of metal bands use these orange cabs, and I've heard a mate of mine who records, and apparently, the guy from Silosis, that apparently they sound shit when you record them.
100% agree.
True.
But the interesting thing about orange is don't use an orange head with an orange cap. The trick is to use an orange head with a different cap. That's what I've kind of sussed out. Ideally, like a Marshall cab or something like that. Not a Mesa cab. Something that has that high end kind of honk as well. You need something a bit more on the low end, and I think that works.
Generally,
really well.
not V30s really. I think V30s are like everyone pairs oranges with V30s, and it's just like it's an awful combination because orange heads are so dark naturally. And then because V30s are kind of scoopy, then what you get is a really dark thing with like a lot of fizz at the top, and it's just like that's a terrible sound.
Yeah. So literally I can't get over how good the amp sounds in the jam room, and it's just a solid state orange head, a CR 100 head, the older heads. And it's some weird Marshall cab. We need to open it up to see what actual speakers are in it. But that combination is just one of those where every time it's perfect. It's just perfect. For what I want, it's perfect. So actually, I've been trying to recreate that in VST and kind of get there. But from a production point of view, that's the one thing where, again, it 100% depends on the kind of music that you play and what you're really after. But if I had my way for this albumy thing, I would have recorded everything the old way for a few specific reasons. One,
like 2-inch tape.
No, not on tape necessarily, but the whole. Preferably, actually, would have liked to do it live. I would have really liked to have done it live, because trying to play a lot with that kind of like feedback and trying to control the feedback and bringing that in musically in part of the whole thing, and the way that amp sounds. If there's any way to capture that, the way it sounds in the room is ideal. All these things that you can't do when you are messing with VSTs or overly polishing something. There is an ambient thing that you can capture, but it's hard to capture and impossible to capture if you use VSTs. So I think you're doing the right thing by going back old school.
I mean,
it depends what you're doing
though.
Like, I think one of the reasons that we can listen to modern metal or even thrash to a degree, I mean, even most of the stuff was done on tape in the old days, the good thrash and death metal, but is because we have that control. We can sort out the bottom end mud. We can sort out the right guitar tones that fit with everything, and we can make sure that there's a certain amount of clarity amongst all that shit that's going on at the same time. So
I tell you what,
yes.
So I tell you what actually kind of it's sort of, well, it's a roundabout way that I came to it. It's not like one day I woke up and I was like, oh shit, I need to stop recording songs with VSTs. It's actually a different thing that kind of led to it, because I do lots of gear reviews and stuff like that, and I think that, and it was actually through first kind of speaking to you about your pedals that kind of brought it up, because now that I've started speaking to lots of different manufacturers about getting demo examples of their gear sent to me to kind of to do demos of, I don't know, there's something about it that sort of actually sort of demoing stuff through VSTs doesn't feel quite as authentic or quite as legitimate. And I felt like if I'm going to start asking companies to send me stuff so that I can review it on my channel, then I better have a good studio amp that records really well, that I can put it into an amp and show on my channel that here's the sound of this thing going into an actual guitar amp. And it's an actual guitar amp. It's not some VST where it's like, Christ knows what I'm putting it through on whatever. It's basically just the guitar amp with the mic in front of it. And this is more or less the raw sound you're getting from it. And this is what it sounds like. And obviously, for better or worse, because the YouTube video is going to come out sounding a certain way because I'll have mixed it and then it'll have gone through my video editing software, and then YouTube's going to compress it and all that kind of stuff. So it won't sound like it's not going to be some idealized A/B test. But at the same time, I feel like that I don't know how comfortable I am with the word integrity, because I know it gets thrown around a lot, but at the same time, I feel like it's something that I want to kind of, I want, if people are going to send me stuff for me to demonstrate it and review it and give an honest opinion on it, I want them to feel like I've put it, at least given it put it in its proper context. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. Pedals should definitely work better with real amps, I think.
I agree, but there's a consideration here. So doesn't matter what pedal, drive pedals or anything, people will put it in front of digital stuff and in digital lines, which are no different from your interface. Realistically, it should do what it's supposed to do regardless of what you do with that pedal. It should sound fine-ish through...
I agree. It's about the
anything.
perception rather than the reality. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I think anyone watching it will be more comfortable seeing it going into an amp head than into an interface. Whether or not the results are the same or work or whatever. I mean, I put pedals into an interface. I know it works fine.
Yeah.
I put things in front of VSTs. I know it works. But it's more about the presentation.
No, I agree with you.
I think,
I threw it in there, but I do agree with you. Like most of the time when I do anything with the pedals, what I record is actually the power amp out of the PV, depending on what I'm doing. So that it goes through the front and it goes through a normal gain stage, through a preamp and power amp. Because I feel the same as you. It just seems a little bit more legit.
Do you not think too, to some degree, and I might be slightly generalizing, but for the most part, people that use VSTs probably aren't going to bother using the pedal. They're just going to use the stuff that's in the suites already. Like I've got loads of pedals that I can use, and I never use them with VST. I just use the one that's in it.
I don't think that there's either or. I think there's loads of different combinations of this. I think that some people are using just VSTs. I think some people are using just real amps. I think some people are using amps with captors and other kind of load boxes. I think in all cases, I think people are either either using pedals or not using pedals. I think there's a very, very healthy kind of interest in pedals, and I think that people who even when I record using VSTs, I tend to use like the pedals that are built into the VST, as it were.
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think I feel like, but I also have like a massive pedal board full of pedals, and I want to use those things, So it's like sometimes I will make a point of, or if like I want to record a section that has like a wah-wah on it, something like that,
Yeah.
I don't plug an expression pedal into my interface. I use a real wah pedal, So it's like. I think there's loads of different ways of doing it, but I think you're right. I think it's likely that a good portion of people who are recording using mostly VSTs, when they're doing that, are probably mostly also using virtual pedals.
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. Though, if you're demoing a pedal on your channel,
Yeah,
I think most people that would search that pedal to see demos of it are typically going to be using it with an amp, for the most part, I would think.
I would think they would at least want to know that it works with the amp. I think that's the thing. They want to hear it.
Maybe I'm thinking more specifically to overdrives and boost pedals in a VST that usually come with it.
Yeah.
The only thing the only thing I could add to this is that I'm not so sure, because in my experience, if you can test this yourself, if you want to, let's say you run a Mesa Boogie, and you want to get a really high gain out of your Mesa Boogie VST, and you're using the boost to get that extra gain, and you don't want to gain up your amp too much by itself. You don't want to run too much of a high gain on the amp itself to keep your noise floor as low as possible. And you use a Tube Screamer pedal into your into your interface, and use that as a boost, and you make sure that your gain staging is right. In my experience, you get a much better tone out of that VST than you do by running your guitar straight into your interface and using a Tube Screamer within the VST. It lifts too much of the noise in the signal from your interface. That's been my experience. And my stuff is fairly clean. What I mean by that is I have a fairly low noise floor in most situations. If you derive most of your gain from pedals, so let's say you don't use a drive channel on your VST amp, but you use, let's say, maybe a distortion pedal and a boost pedal, again, I would suggest that you're better off using those pedals in front, real pedals in front, and then run it into an amp VST and cab emulation. Because in my experience, it's been that, firstly, it does sound a bit better because the response between your guitar and your pedal is better than the response between your guitar and the guitar and the interface. And the second thing is that it's a better gain staging between all the different sections. But
I would say you're asking quite a lot of sort of the general public. I think that the proportion of guitar players who actually understand gain staging.
I do need to make this very clear. That is my experience. That is my guitar, my pedals, my interface, my computer. It could be a different story for somebody else. So it is important to add that. But I do find that especially distortion pedals and drive pedals, they tend to not be as good in VSTs as they are in real life. But that is my experience.
Yeah. I'd also say that to come back to kind of recording, I guess the thing for me I've found, and I don't know what you guys think, but I've always found that like the more I learn about recording, the more I record, and the more things I record, and the more sources I try and record, and especially the more guitar tones I record, um, I think like the effort to kind of try and pile on as much kind of gain and distortion and that kind of stuff as possible is like, I find that almost without exception, I always get better results from my recorded tones when I remove as much distortion as possible, as much overdrive as possible. Like I try and record the cleanest possible guitar. But even when I'm like going for like massive, huge, distorted guitar tones, I try and still get it to like as little gain as possible, where I'm still getting the compression and sustain and the tone, sort of the, you know, the kind of the tonal characteristics that I'm looking for. But I don't want that kind of, I don't want it, I don't want the gain cranked all the way up. I want it to be like really, I just try and turn it down and turn it down and turn it down, just edge it as far down as possible until I'm at a point where it's like, it's only just giving me that kind of, you know, saturation. Only just, like very slightly. And then I record with that. And usually I find that's the best sound I can get for that application. I don't know if you guys have the same experience.
I agree. You typically would use less gain on recording than you would live anyway, for the most part. But yeah, if you have too much gain, you lose a lot of the attack, and it doesn't actually sound heavier. It kind of washes out. Yeah, I try to use. I used to be a gain junkie years ago, like a lot, but over the years I've backed it off and off and off to that point where it's so it just sounds bigger. So I try and use as little as I can get away with.
Yeah.
I even know. I've got it to the point now with the dual rec where I know exactly what the gain setting is depending on what guitar I'm playing, because one has higher output pickups than the other, so I just nudge it half. Just little things like that. Yeah, I try. I totally agree with you. It doesn't actually sound heavier, or you lose a lot of the articulation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That there's a lot of things that are that come in when you use too much gain that are then too difficult to actually get rid of in post production. It's absolutely.
That actually reminds me. It actually reminds me of a show we played years ago. Not that long actually. I was in Bloodthread. We played in the attic. You'll know the attic behind the garage in Rocky Hall Street. And we were playing with this young band, and they had like line 6 amps, and they had the gain all washed out. And the drummer couldn't hear anything, and so they kept turning them up, but nothing changed. And I was trying to explain to the guy, if you back your gain down, and then you don't need to turn the volume up as much because you're going through the PA anyway, then the drummer would hear it. And nothing I could tell him would get him to turn his gain down at all. And they just kept arguing and arguing and arguing. And him and the drummer nearly ended up fighting. And it didn't matter what. The sound engineer just gave up, just left them to it. It was that ridiculous. There's not, and all you could hear was that, nothing else. And the drummer couldn't hear it. And the guy kept cranking the volume rather than pulling the gain down. And I was probably like that when I was that age myself as well. But yeah, it's even live. If you do too much, it's just a problem.
Well, I have like a guide for myself of where the gain should sit. So there is a point at which your feedback changes from this harmonic kind of feedback to a squeal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? That's the easy way. Like just dial it back to when it becomes harmonic and not a squeal. The other one is if you're I try and have it just so the pinch harmonics stay. And that's enough. So enough gain for a good pinch harmonic, but no more. Those are my kind of two, in my head, my guide for how to set how much gain should there be.
The pinch harmonic's probably the ultimate test, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, and if it sings, it's fine. If it's not, if it's choking.
Yeah, and I'm not the greatest at it, so for me, it's like perfect way of trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned before on one of our casts that I think like heavy metal's the hardest genre of music to mix, and I think a lot of that is to do with that kind of the amount, the bandwidth of guitars, because it's not like with like classic rock where the guitars are basically just in the mid range and that's it, that's fine. If you listen to AC/DC, there's really no bass at all in the guitars and not a great deal of treble either. But like with metal, it's like the guitars need to be kind of all encompassing and all that kind of stuff. And I just think that the more gain you kind of pile on, the harder that becomes to achieve, because if you have too much gain, then all of the high end is like really fizzy, and then all of the low end is like really kind of sort of flubby and kind of, dark. And that just ends up eating the rest of the mix. And I think that's kind of like, that's what I found anyway.
Too much gain and not enough mid. The two cardinal sins of the death metal guitar player, or not?
I think we should need to jump a little bit. Oh man, I bet you if we ask the question, what's our current setup, it's all the same. We have a couple of mics. We all have a half decent interface. We use a DAW and a selection of VSTs and amp sims. Am I right?
Well, the reason I put that there is because I actually want to talk about monitors. Because it's not something that gets a lot of discussion, because it's very difficult to make a video review of monitors, if you think about it.
Oh.
Because you can review microphones, you can review interfaces, you can review VSTs, you can review DAWs, you can review all that kind of stuff, because they're very kind of visual, but it's like a speaker just kind of sits there. And it's like you can't make a video about it, because it's like, well, I can record my speaker, but then it's coming through your speaker, so you have no idea what it sounds like. So it's just a really difficult thing to illustrate. So because of that, they get very kind of bad press. But actually, I think probably the monitors are just the most important part of it, because like I said, the baseline for a if you spend a couple of £100 on your interface, like a 2-track interface, you're going to have a good interface, aren't you? It's going to work. And then you can get a decent condenser microphone for say £300-400. You can get a decent dynamic microphone for £100. So it's like, that's fine. That's all dealt with. And then your DAW is free if you use Reaper, and then you can get a bunch of free VSTs that will do you absolutely fine forever if that's what you want to do. But your studio monitors are inescapably like something that are going to be, you need to invest in them, because they need to be good and they need to perform a certain role. And there's kind of other considerations beyond that to do with like the acoustics of your room, and something I'm quite sensitive to, because the acoustics in this room are absolutely garbage, because all the surfaces are parallel, and the sort of the distance between the floor and the ceiling is the same as the distance between these two walls. So it's like standing waves galore. But I think I think studio monitors are like a massively under-discussed subject, especially considering how expensive they can get. So what are you guys running?
Mine are Ackies. Nothing too expensive just yet, but they are the next thing I plan on upgrading. Probably to my bass has got what are they again? Harley LP6s. They're a brand that Glenn Fricker and a few other people highly recommend. He got those, and he says they sound absolutely amazing. I haven't actually heard them yet, but that'll be the next thing I'll be upgrading, will be that. As I said, I don't do a lot of mixing, predominantly just tracking at the moment. But that would be my next upgrade, rather than any guitar gear, which I've got more than enough of. I say now, but like.
So, I am one of those reference people. The set of speakers that I have run through an older hi-fi rather than like a clean power amp, and it's set to a certain way that I listen to everything on. And the speakers that I use for mixing, I have had for 20 years. and they're a set of Iowa speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I still use them and haven't bought monitors or anything like that is because of that old thing where you absolutely know everything about them.
Yeah.
And so when I get into, because I listen to pretty much everything I listen to on them, that's kind of my reference to that everything is in order. But when it comes to things that I'm not sure about, like certain low-end issues or where the top end sets, that is one of the reasons I try and listen to things before it goes out in as many different environments. There's also, in my head, there's a logic which says, why the fuck should I be mixing something on a 400, 500,000 pound monitor when nobody else is going to be listening to that music on it? A monitor is a reference. So that means that it is an absolute reference of something. But nobody's going to listen to it on that absolute reference. They're going to be listening to it on something normal, something, dare I say, consumer, you know. So that's kind of my logic. Whether I'm right or wrong is another question. I've got another set there, which are more monitor-like speakers, which I sometimes hook up to check. But overall, I kind of don't change these. I think more important than the speakers, I think that it's like one of those curve things. Like once you get to a certain level of speaker, it's more about what's your amp set to. Like, have you got any stupid EQ on it? And on top of that, more important is actually your sound treatment, because you can have 400-pound, 500-pound studio monitors, and you can make bad decisions because you've not got the right environment, or you might literally just be sitting in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
Right. These speakers are, I'm literally in that triangle. You know, that like my ear holes are exactly the same level as the cones, and I'm exactly in that triangle. And it's unbelievable how quickly the sound changes if I move 10 inches backwards, forwards, left or right, up or down. Like it's insane actually how much it changes. I think the whole listening environment. And the other thing I do is, like, I would mix sitting here right in the sweet spot, and I would play it softly and walk around the room. I would play it really loud, be in different rooms. I would do all sorts of tricks or ways to try and figure out if anything is out of place or anything's too loud, too soft, if anything is like disappearing. My feeling is that you need a decent set of speakers in a decent environment, and you'll probably do a decent mix.
I've heard people say that you do get the argument about the monitors, how important they are, and I've heard a few people say that you can mix on any of them, like what you were saying, you know them inside out, and a good way to do that is listen to a lot of your favorite music in it, and that gives you like a jumping off point.
Well, the truth is, though, that these are by no means cheap speakers or anything. They are really good speakers. They just happen to be consumer speakers. And the speakers themselves are not necessarily... Oh, the other thing about the speakers is that they're nearly full range. They go from 20 hertz all the way to 22, right? Which is not even... And this is one of the another reason why I haven't bought any monitor speakers yet, is because having looked at their specs, they don't even have the full range, a lot of them. They go from like 50 hertz all the way up to maybe 18 or 20. They don't even have the full range. You know, that's even more important that they have a full range, because if it starts cutting off the low end in the specs, you're like, well, how am I going to know what the low end is like? Because I can hear all the way up to about 40, 30 if I'm, you know, of a certain age. And the other thing is to make sure that if you're then listening to it, that you don't have any weird fucking hidden EQ curve somewhere, like your Windows doesn't have some sort of EQ setting set, or your hi-fi or whatever power amp that you're using doesn't have some sort of bass boost, or I don't know, Dolby or some weird shit enabled. That everything is just kind of, dare I say, stock or whatever. I think that these things are a little bit more important. The only thing I have noticed that is nearly impossible to do anything decent on is headphones.
I think that depends on the headphones. I track using these, which are Bear Dynamic DT770 Pros, but I wouldn't mix on these because, I mean, well, they're closed back. They're very kind of, they're brand new as well, so the treble's very kind of spiky. But I've got a set of open back AKGs. Now, I'll reference mix using these, which are AKG K712s. And they're pretty good. They're very, very flat response. They have quite good bass, but it's not hyped or anything like that. So,
Yeah.
But the treble is exceptional. And the drivers are very, very big in these. So, I mean, I use them as a reference, but I wouldn't, you know, use them as a main reference mix or whatever.
I managed I managed to swipe some Sony studio headphones from years ago from where I worked, and they were so accurate. The only reason I don't use them anymore is because one of the things broke, so I kind of have to like hold them onto my head. But they were actually for video referencing. So when you do camera work, it was you would put them on to get to do your levels and everything.
Yeah,
I still have.
I think that the good thing about these is how fast they are. So I was doing some sessions a few years ago where I was doing snare replacement, and on my main set of monitors, I thought I had the snares perfectly lined up, and then I reference listened back through to there, through on those headphones, and they revealed where there was actually a little bit you could hear, like if they were out, and you couldn't hear them on the main monitors because the response on those is so fast that it would pick up the slight, just the ever so slight delay that there was between the snares. So, yeah, I think there's loads of things to consider there. There's sort of the, you know, obviously the extension in bass and treble, the kind of the flat EQ response, and then also just the speed of them, because I think like a lot of speakers are really, really slow, which is why I never ended up keeping the NS10s, because they were just incredibly slow. Everything just sounded really, really mushy because the cones just didn't move fast enough to kind of reproduce all of the sort of the detail of the sound. So rather than go for like, I had a set of Yamaha HS8s, which sounded really, really good. But to kind of get the bass extension, they had 8-inch drivers. Well, I think 8.5-inch. And they sounded really mellow and everything, but because of the size of the speaker, it didn't move enough. So I'm using focal shape twins a minute, which I'll try and show you. Here we go. These things here. They're like a, hang on. Back up on there. Yeah, so they're like a dual 4-inch driver with the tweeter in the middle.
Yeah.
And they have these sort of on the side, they have these on both sides, which are like these bass ports. So basically they're like passive bass response kind of, they they're like their version of ports, but they have a resonant kind of chamber in them, so they reproduce bass extension down to I think 12 hertz. So yeah, so they're really, really, really good speakers to mix on, and they should be because they were fucking expensive.
Okay.
But yeah, beyond that, but you're right though. Sorry to come back to right at the start of the question. The other thing would be obviously the interface. Like you say, we're probably all using something fairly similar. I was using the Focusrite Sapphire, not Sapphire. What was it? Not the Claret, something else. The one of the red ones, the cheap red one. It had like
Scarlet.
8 tracks. Huh?
Scarlet, was it?
Scarlet, thank you. Yes, the Scarlet 8-track rack mount one. But I've banned all rack equipment from my studio now. So I've gone down to the Universal Audio. What is it? The Volt 476, which is like it has 2 mic preamps and then 2 line ins, and it has 1176 compressors in it, and a couple of whatever the Universal Audio preamps are. So those are pretty good. But the mics is a really important one. So I've got this mic, which is very good and very cheap, which I'd recommend, which is the Warm Audio WA. What is it? 60. Yeah, 67. WA67 Junior, I think, which is like a clone of the FET U67 FET. But I've got
The mics isn't a thing I have much of or have much need for. This here isn't even mine. It's Dee's. It's a Lewitt when she does the voiceover stuff.
Oh, it's really good.
Yeah, it's really good. It's not mine. It's my fiance. She does voiceover stuff.
Ah,
So
yeah.
she bought that. She upgraded a few times, and that's the one she's using now. So we're not in this house this long, so this studio is relatively new. So the mic I was using, I don't even know where it is yet. So I've been using this.
It's the U47, the Neumann U47, or the Telefunken U47, or whatever. This is the Warm Audio version of it. So that's what I use for like proper vocals. And that's Valve. I've got the power supply for it on the desk, but it's got a valve in here. And that's like a really, really nice microphone. But other than that, it's just the usual bunch of dynamics that everyone else has.
Yeah. For mics for us too, we use an SM7B on vocals, but it's not mine. It's the Boss, has it? Yeah, mics isn't a thing I've got a huge amount of. I have a couple of SM57s and things and 8s, but I've not done any live
microphones. It becomes like guitar pedals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's why I'm trying to avoid it.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
you're like, oh, I've got a really good condenser now. I need a ribbon microphone.
Yeah.
Ricky, between the three of us in my band, we have a bit of a collection. Like Ricky has, there's quite a few that we could use on kick drums and things. You know, those bass cabs and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really. It wouldn't be something I would know a huge amount about, really.
So I'm gonna.
I don't even know what that is. It's a Lewitt, but I don't know what model it is.
I'm gonna throw a massive spanner in this whole fucking thing. I think one of the best mics that you can possibly buy are these. The Behringer
is it?
C2s, the little pencil mics.
Ah,
They are 100% clear, hardly any noise floor to speak of, and completely flat response. Now, for everyday use, they sound unbelievable on snare, and I can vouch for that. And they're dirt cheap, so you can buy like a couple of packs. I use it for this. Yeah, this is for the nearly everything I use them. They sound pretty decent on a cab as well, because they have the you can I mean they're condensers obviously, but you can go minus 10 dB, and you can cut the low end, so it works really well. That's why it works so well with snare. Then there were years ago I bought these dirt cheap brand of Amazon. It's like they're not big caps, they're like the kind of in the middle cap size. They are so good, they are so clear for vocals and stuff. The problem with them is they can't take much noise, so they're really good for acoustic stuff, but you can't put them in front of a drum or a cab. They will clip immediately. But
Yeah.
the one good mic I have, where the fuck is that bastard? Which I love, is this one here. I've, over the last few years, since I lost the studio, I've kind of sold all the good stuff. I just kept some of the things which I really know work on certain scenarios. Like, see what I like about this cheap mic here that I showed you? This is the weirdest thing. This one here, I bought 2 of them. It's one of those where they can't take a huge amount of volume. So if you put them in front of a cab and you don't blast your cab, you can get a really good tone. And what's good about them is that they capture the whole speaker. So once you have that one mic in the right position, you're done. You're finished. You don't have to worry about it. This one here is my favorite. This the
SE Electronics.
SE, yeah.
Is that the 2200?
It's the SE 2000, but it's an older one. And
The SEs are great. I had a 5600Z, I think the Mark II, and that thing was incredible. And I had a Gemini as well, not the really big one, but the one that had like a really round kind of capsule.
yeah,
That one was really good.
but I kind of
Funny,
hardly ever use it because I don't feel I need to. I honestly, and I know this, I mean, I'm not a far from a big promoter of Behringer stuff, but I can't fault these little ones. I just can't. They are just exactly what you hear is what they pick up, and that's it. End of story.
those SE mics, Ross has started using one as his main vocal mic. I think it's a V7. It looks the cap on it looks like there's red inside it,
Yeah.
and it sounds way better than the SM58. So I've got a couple of them, and he has as well. And we even tried tracking with it as well as the Shure SM7B, and it sounds great, even like for recording.
So the other recommend I have is this, which is a Bayer Dynamic. What is it? Sorry, a TG-X60, which is an affordable like dynamic microphone. It has a slightly larger capsule, but it still takes quite a lot of sound pressure level. So if you're recording clean guitars through a cab, then this is worth having, because if you're recording distorted guitars, you might want a sort of a narrower bandwidth. So you could use like a smaller capsule, like an SM57. But like with this, it has a larger capsule, so you're capturing a much broader spectrum of harmonics, which is really cool on that one.
Mics are another whole. Mics are even worse than pedals. Once you, it's one of those traps you really don't want to fall into, because you'll be buying all day long.
That's it, yeah. Just like nothing but just random. Sort of, I got some pretty cheap dynamics here as well. I don't even know what brand this is. It doesn't say on it.
I was waiting for you to start juggling there when you took them out.
Yeah, I can see that one looks like the classic one from a jam room where you think that if I get close to this, I will be immune to everything under the sun.
Yeah, that's the. This is the SM58 that I've had since I was 17. And this has been replaced probably about sort of 3 or 4 times, and it started to rust again. And there's no foam on the inside of it, and it's absolutely fucked. This is an AKG something D870. It's actually quite good. And then this is this is a Samson, which is probably a whole 15 pounds worth of microphone right here.
Yeah.
And I think this isn't too bad actually. I think I used these on like floor toms, because you don't need floor toms to sound good basically.
Oi. Wholeheartedly disagree, but okay.
Well, no, you put it on the middle tom because no one ever plays the middle tom. It's just there for show.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. No, I'm just so I just find these little C2s so interesting, and I like the idea that they're so cheap because it means like it would be it's the ideal mic for something like, let's say you set up a show, right? You have a couple of bands and you want to mic up the drum kit with something half decent, which has a really good response, sound good, but you know that there's a good chance they might get fucked up. You know, it's one of those. Like, okay, fine, just put them on there. I did have the Tascam 2020, the interface. I like that a lot. Recorded drums through that really well because you had no limit on essentially on how many mics you could put on. Recorded 3 bands with that actually. That was really cool. You had enough inputs to have. How did I mic up the drums? Okay, so I had back and front, so back of the drums and beater, so that's 2. I had 3 on the snare, and there was a reason for it because it was a SM57 on the snare and one of these C2s, and then one C2 not on the bottom but on the side, on the shell, for a bit of a ring and a crack. There was 2 overheads, then an additional one on both the hi-hat and the ride, and then there was a stereo set for the room mic. Then there was enough inputs for the vocalist, 2 guitars, and bass, DI'd in for the guide track, which is ideal. I mean, that's a at the time when I got it, it was like what, a £350 interface, and you could track that at 48 kilohertz, no problem.
I got the Tascam interface before I bought the Focusrite. I got the Tascam interface that they brought out after they discontinued the 2020, and I had to return it to Anderton's because I got it and I plugged it in and it basically didn't work. The drivers were absolutely fucked, and I phoned up Anderton's and I was like, I need to trade this in because it just doesn't work. I want to get the Focusrite instead. And the guy was like, yeah, none of them work.
Weird.
So something went on with Tascam at some point where, like, I don't know if they changed hands or something like that, but they started putting out, like, Tascam used to be a really, really reliable, really sort of well-reputed company, and just lately they've totally shit the bed.
I couldn't fault the thing. The drive, not the drivers, but the kind of interface. Like, you had full control over, like, every input. You could manage a bit of compression and panning and all sorts of things, and you can do some routing as well, which was really good. But it wasn't over the top. There were certain limitations to what you could do with it. But it was everything that you needed to do good tracking, everything that you kind of needed. I was really happy with it. I was actually quite sad to see it go. It was really useful just to have all those inputs that just work, you know. Now I've got the 4-channel a Behringer HD, the 404, which, I mean, honestly, there's just nothing wrong with it. There's everything crystal clear and pristine, so I don't know. Yeah. Even I think this one doesn't have MIDI. Hold on. Can't remember if this.
A lot of them don't. And I'm if I'm honest, I'm just waiting for the point where, like, you know, those MIDI DIN cables just stop existing, you know, and everything's just like some kind of USB cable, because it just seems stupid at this point.
Yeah, no, I think this one doesn't have the MIDI, because you don't really need it. It's like you say. I mean, when I was doing stuff with Tamsin, we MIDI'd out her piano through USB, and we used the interface for other things. No bother. You don't.
Yeah, in my keyboard here, that's a MIDI keyboard. It's my MIDI controller, but I do it via USB. It's like, don't need the MIDI ports on the back of my interface.
Right. Before we get too distracted, what are the records that made us want to record, and what is it about their method or sound that inspired us? Who wants to go first?
That might be one for you two more than me, really. I don't know if an actual... There's albums I love the production of, but I don't know if it really inspired me to do it. I kind of just done it for the songwriting initially.
Well, I guess the question there then would be, you know, when you're making recordings, when you're participating in making recordings, what albums is it that you think about that you would like to sound like?
I always loved their production on the first Machine Head album, Burn My Eyes.
Oh yes.
That's a particular one that always, even to this day, still sounds great, stands out.
Yeah, for sure.
That would be Slaughter of the Soul, actually, from At the Gates we spoke about last week.
Yeah.
Maybe the buzzsaw guitar tone that, but nowadays I don't know if I really like that tone anymore, but the way it was produced. I actually do quite enjoy watching documentaries on the making of albums. I quite find that quite interesting. You know, the way stuff is put together. Like the recent Mastodon one's quite cool, actually.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, in that they didn't go really into any detail of the production. They were more...
Not massively, no. More how it came together. And Sugar's always an interesting one because they mix it up so much. They try to do something new. Maybe a bit less so in the last two albums. Although the Violent Sleeper Reason was the one that went back to real amps for the first time in a while on an album. And it actually sounded all the better for it, because the one before that, the guitar tone on it was a bit... Didn't really like it on the Kolos album. Some great songs on it, but I didn't like the guitar tone was quite piercing on it. Whereas when the Violet Sleep came out, it was the one that went back to real amps, and you could actually really... Well, I don't know if you could say you could tell, because you were told, but it definitely sounded way better than Kolos. Gojira, I like Gojira's productions as well. Way of All Flesh in particular. There's probably a theme with me. It's going to be always on the heavy end of stuff, more so than...
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of big drums and big guitars.
Yeah.
But the Gojira stuff does sound really good, and it also doesn't sound typical. There is a certain difference to it from all the other stuff, which I appreciate.
You can hear... It's amazing how much Gojira you can hear in modern metal now. Like that harmonic pick scrape thing to do down to the strings and all that. You hear everybody doing that now.
Yeah.
I love Will Putney as a producer. The last couple of Fit for an Autopsy album, his band, the last two albums, the production on that sounds great. I think he's got that blend of all the modern techniques, but enough of the rawness in it He's very big on that. He does a lot of hardcore stuff as well. He does quite a wide spectrum of extreme music. You can see why he's in demand. But I love the particular last album. The production on it was on what's the album called? Oh, What the Future Holds. The last album's called. The production on that. The guitars are tuned really low, but they sound so thick, like massive sounding. And as a band, I think they're. I was never hugely into that deathcore thing. I know they were kind of lumped in with that. But I think they're one of them bands. They're gradually starting to become their own entity. You know, when you listen to Fit for an Autopsy album, now you go, they just sound like Fit for an Autopsy, rather than particularly reeking of any particular genre anymore. But he's an amazing producer. I think he'd probably be the most interesting one. I like Christian Cola as well. I like that he's pushing for different things, like trying to get away from the vintage 30 and trying all sorts of different speakers and things. And he's some good courses on recording. He still uses real amps, even though he has a Kemper and was one of the early ones that had it. But he said that he found that if he was, say, probably what you were saying earlier on about getting away from VSTs, he said that he could make a record and he could, whatever amp setup he used on that, he would then profile that on the Kemper when he first had the Kemper. And he said then, say then he had all these profiles that he made himself, and then 7 albums down the line, he might use the profile he made of that album back there. And then he said he'd rather just do it using, even if it was the same amp again, it would still sound different. Even if you use the same amp, the same mic, the same cab, everything. Because the amp might, like valve amps, that they can be a bit, they never quite sound exactly the same. They can vary. And the mic might be half a millimeter away than it was the first time.
And also, I mean, he might just not have had a sandwich yet. I think that the interesting thing is what you said earlier, Helmut, about like how, because you sit in the golden triangle, as do we all responsible mix engineers when we're mixing, sit like equidistantly from our speakers. And the sound changes dramatically depending on how far we move backwards or forwards. It also changes dramatically depending on how much sleep we've had and how much we've eaten that day, and whether we've taken a shower or not, or how much loud music we've listened to right before that point, or the song we've just listened to, or how long we've spent listening to the specific mix we're listening to right now. I think that's sort of an interesting thing to kind of talk about. Obviously, and that's not the question we're talking about now, but I think that's the other thing about like, I think it's funny in context, because when we're talking about monitors, like it's something that sort of occurred to me, that when you hear people talking about monitors, it's as if there's some kind of ideal set of monitors that every other monitors are judged by. Like there's some kind of notion of like, the right way for monitors to sound.
Yeah.
Like there is some kind of golden ideal of what music should sound like. It's just not true. There's just like all the speakers that happen to exist right now, and all the music that exists right now will sound different depending on what speakers it's coming out of. And then when all those speakers are gone, there'll be a whole bunch of new speakers, and it'll sound different through those speakers as well. And so what we judge to be, the best way for those things to sound is different to what it was 20 years ago and what it'll be 20 years from now. And like, so what you're saying about the Kemper is exactly relevant, because the guy might profile an amp at one given moment and go, well, it sounds really great now, so I'm going to profile it so I always have that sound. He comes back to it, like you say, a bunch of albums later, and he listens to it and he's just like, well, actually I prefer the sound of the real amp now.
It was just boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
there is a bit of the tone. There is a bit of the tone in the can thing with that stuff too, isn't there? Like, I know a few people that have Kempers, and there's nothing wrong with them. But like, if you're getting someone else's profile, like he will have done that with a totally different guitar than you're playing, different pickups. So you aren't going to sound like that unless you're him and you have the same setup. Like it's.
I think there's just also something to be said for the emotional response of actually putting your guitar through an actual amp and having it sound the way it sounds, and having the amp react the way it reacts, and it not being emulated. And I think even if the sound is scientifically identical, I think there is still that emotional component of it that does necessarily bring to bear, unless the guitarist is completely unaware of what's going on, which is
Oh,
unlikely. So
there is a huge difference. Like we're practicing, I'm using real amps and pedals, and it's it's a feel. You notice a massive difference in the way they feel to the VSTs.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's there's also something to be said about um, why why would why would you want somebody else's patch,
Yeah, I
right?
don't get it.
And the other on top of that is like, fair enough. Some people might just want to make music. They're just interested in writing, and that's fine. But I mean, for me, the biggest joy is the hobby of fucking around with the shit, of dialing stuff in and finding stuff and trying stuff. So it's a bit weird that you would want to go down the Kemper route, um, and not being, let's say you're happy with this tone. And I'm even if I'm happy with something, I'm always have like, oh, what if we do that? It's a
Well,
weird concept. The Kemper thing is a weird concept to me, except for an absolute practical scenario for this is the tone that we have on the record. Let's take this on tour.
Yeah, then you don't have all the big shipping costs of hauling big amps around, and
To me, that's the
they're arguably more
only.
reliable.
And then on top of
say
that is the whole business of plagiarism. And I've literally made a video years ago about this, because I really find I don't find VSTs or amp modelers or anything like that necessarily plagiarism, but I find Kemper profiling an amp and a speaker and a cab a Xerox it's like, I'm gonna copy that and I'm gonna use that. It's like, I mean, I'm ranting down and we're getting off topic, but to me, the Kemper, what is designed for is I snapshot something and I can now use it at home, live, in the studio, wherever, get it. But that's not what people, and because it's obvious that people weren't going to do that. And the majority of people are going to do it because suddenly they feel like they can have every amp and every cab and every artist's exact sound. And it's just like, that's the weirdest thing to me. It just doesn't.
I think you're right, and I think in a way that I mean, obviously there's this hugely, I mean, that there's no legal precedent obviously for copywriting the way an amplifier sounds. It's like there are some, like famously the guy who made the clones, and I think it was Dumble. They used to put like black epoxy all over their circuit boards so that no one could know how they made the amps, whatever. No one could copy that. But at the same time, it's like if you have a Kemper, you can copy the sound. There isn't a legal precedent for like, you can't copy the way an amplifier sounds because it's my intellectual property and therefore XYZ. So obviously that's hugely problematic. But at the same time, I feel like instinctively people feel like, I don't think I agree with you, because I totally see your point. I do think it is, to an extent, I think it is plagiarism, because someone designs a circuit to make an amp sound a certain way, and you come along with your technology that's basically designed to go yoink.
Yeah.
Now, I have a device that sounds exactly the same and plays exactly the same, to the extent where professional guitar players can't tell the difference. At the same time, I think that I don't think it's a threat. I agree that it's plagiarism, but I don't think that the amp manufacturers are under threat from it. I don't think so much as like a Fender, Vibrolux is under, single sale of a Fender fucking, Hot Rod Deluxe is under threat from being profiled, because I think that if someone wants the amp, they're not going to settle for the Kemper Pro. I think if someone buys a Kemper Profiler, they want the Kemper Profiler. It's not because they want to own the amps that are on the Kemper Profiler.
No, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I don't
Yeah.
think that the amp manufacturers have ever necessarily really been under threat from the likes of Kempers. Maybe from the
Yeah.
likes of the FX or Line 6 or something, in a sense where they, put the amp into a unit, and let you have it, especially if they're not licensed, and then when you see that they're not licensed, because the majority of them will not say, "Oh, this is Mesa Boogie so and so." They'll say, "This is, I don't know, Mesa Boogie Woogie or something,"
Well, but I think also, I mean, I've had a Helix. I had a Helix for a while, and I got rid of it, and I mean, I haven't really kind of unpacked why, but other than it was boring. But I mean, I think part of it was probably the fact that it had a bunch of presets that were like, German metal, and you were supposed to infer that it was like an Engel or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just like it because it just it's the opposite of inspiring. It's like something pretending to be something, and it's just like
It's,
that to me. The immediate lack of authenticity just sort of just completely kills any inspiration.
it's
Um,
funny you say that. My bass player had one as well, Line 6
yeah,
Helix, because he had
yeah,
stopped playing, so he bought that so he could write his own stuff at home. He could play guitar and bass. And after about 2 jams when he started playing with us, it was gone. And he bought a dark glass amp and cab. Because it's just, for that reason, he said, it's just uninspiring. I don't feel like it's moving in the air, because it's got through the pain. That. And he said, there's just that much stuff on it. I can't even be arsed sitting down trying to figure out all of it. And it's just, I don't need all that.
yeah, yeah. It all comes back down to that thing over there has it has 6 knobs on it, and I can, it's got an effects loop or whatever, and I plug a guitar into it, and I just turn those 6 knobs until it sounds good, and takes me about 30 seconds, and I've got something immediately satisfying, and it's real, and it
Yeah.
makes a sound when you switch it on, and it's just like, and it just sounds fucking great, and it's just like, it's when it comes down to it, really, when you get past all the nitty gritty of the practicalities and the ins and outs and what are you using it for, and if you go on tour, and can you take it through customs and all that kind of, it's just like, that's what I want. I think that's probably what most guitar players want, really.
Yeah, given the
Yeah,
choice, I think, yeah, they use amps. Do you know, going back to Helmut there about the plagiarism thing, do you not think maybe the amplifier companies missed the trick with the Kemper? Because how many studios made a fortune selling Kemper profiles?
this So if any of you have the time and the patience, go back into my video list, and I make all these points about the fucking Kemper.
I think I remember. I think I
All
remember that. Were you walking out with the dog on the hill and you were having a
I
rant about it?
Because it
Yeah, I remember.
literally sticks in my throat, and it's not really Kemper's fault, because Kemper is just a tool, right? Kemper was designed for a specific reason. It is the attitude of the people who ended up buying them, making profiles, selling them, or buying, going to music stores, buying amps, and returning them within 5 days after they
Yeah.
fucking cloned them. It's the way that people abused, dare I say, the system that Kemper has created. I don't know what Kemper's motivation was when they did it, other than doing something that in first thought probably seems like a really good idea. Oh man, maybe we can literally, with this new technology, take a snapshot of a certain amp, and that person can then take it with them wherever. But that's not how people are. The first thing that people are going to do is they're going to fucking ride it to the end and fuck everything and everyone open. And the other point that I find that I'm making there is, well, there's two things that I think are important. One is this whole idea. There's tons of people who bitched and complained, you can't copyright the tone. No, but that is a legal issue, not a moral issue. You can make that legal. Morally, you are stealing something. Legally, nobody's made a law for that yet. That's the only thing. But that tone wouldn't exist without somebody sitting there designing a circuit and a speaker and a resonant frequency and a cab in a certain way to create X, Y, and Z. And what you're doing is you're taking all that time and effort and that intellectual property from somebody. Whether it's legal or not is a different question, but morally it's fucked up. And the other point that I make is exactly what Max was saying. If you look at amplitude, you will notice that all the stuff that they have named in there, they're all licensed. Because they didn't just license that amp, but they actually they obviously took or pay a certain license towards using the brand name within it. So if you play a Marshall in Amplitude, it actually says Marshall 800 or Marshall 900 or J45 or whatever, because they've actually said, hey, Marshall, you know what, how about it, do you want something, or whatever deal they did, but at least there was some sort of communication and agreement or money or license or whatever there was. That doesn't exist.
Fender did the same. Fender pack as well, and that was they had a bunch of Fender amps on that. Yeah,
and I think that's massively different, and that is where, when it comes to like the Kemper, I don't know about the Axe FX, but a lot of the people that make the VSTs for certain stuff, you don't know if they had that conversation. You don't know if they phoned up Engel and said, listen, we want to do, a range of your amps as VSTs. Could you help us? Because all these things are modeled according to schematics, right? The way that the good amp sims work is that they literally mimic every component on the route through the amp. It's not just the EQ curve that they apply. There's a certain logic to actually making it sound half decent. These conversations can easily be had. And imagine you have that conversation with the likes of Engel, and you have some sort of a collaboration. They promote your VST because they get a kickback. You are promoting Engel amps to an audience that they have never ever seen before. It benefits both. It's when it's done in this Kemper way, where it's just a Xerox, effort.
Yeah, it's like they just give you the machine to duplicate stuff. They don't create the duplicates themselves.
Yeah.
They just, here's a thing, just plug it into whatever amp you want, and hey presto, and then everyone makes a bunch of tones of whatever, and it's just like, but it's kind of weird as well. It's like, the other thing is like, I don't ever really use presets like on VSTs or whatever it is.
They're always shit.
Because it's like I'll learn to use the thing. So whatever default it appears in, I'll learn what all the knobs do, and then I'll tweak it until it sounds the way I want it to sound.
Yeah,
I don't go into some sub menu and go like, oh, kick, or here's the distorted guitar or fucking violin or whatever it is. It's just like, no. I want to know what these things do, and then I'll figure it out for myself. And I think that's also the sort of the Kemper thing is like the complete opposite of that. It's like, not only is it removing the necessity for you to kind of come up with your own sound, it's literally kind of just serving you like not it's beyond the preset. Here's a product you don't even need to buy anymore.
Yeah,
here it is. It's like, done. So it's like, I wonder if there are any real. I always wonder, it's these kind of products. It's like, I guess the bottom line for so many of these things is, what music have people made with them? It's like, is there a piece of music I can listen to right now that's like changed the world, that I can listen to, that's someone's made with it, that, it's like Brian May had his Red Special, his little Vox or whatever, or the D-Key amp that John Deacon built for him. And he wrote like 50 songs that anyone can hum because they completely changed the face of music. And it's like, I don't think anyone who's got a Kemper with a capture of a fucking SLO 100 has done that. You know what I mean? With one of them Line 6 Variax guitars. I just don't. I don't think it's happening.
Maybe that should be our mission. See if there's anything out there that is of any reasonable musical expression that has been.
I can actually think of one band right offhand.
Uh-oh.
A band called Rivers of Nile. On their last two albums, they used Kempers, even everything. But their last two records. They're death metal, so it would be a little bit niche. But they're one of the few bands I can think of that's pushing that genre forwards, and are getting less death metal.
But here's the problem with what we're talking about, is that we don't know if this band how they use the Kemper. What I mean by that is like there is a absolutely wonderful and legitimate way to use the Kemper. We were specifically mentioning the Kemper, you know, as a way to just copy other people's stuff, because you don't know if these guys, you know, went and profiled, put in the time and profiled some amps themselves. We don't know that, you know. That would be the, I suppose that's the next level of the question, because like I said, I think
this sort of ties into that last question, doesn't it, of whether like people who produce equipment for the music industry, for the music recording industry, or for the music making industry, whether those people are serving an actual need, or whether they're sort of, you know, marketing some fake perceived need in order to sell a product they've come up with.
Well, I think that's
whether they're so
easy
really
question.
Exists, you know,
easy question to answer, because every single product that ever gets sold always gets sold as this is the best one, right? So I mean, how many VSTs have now been the most accurate? They've been good. I mean, do you remember? I still use them to this day. The Emissary, as well as Poland, some French company that did a Marshall, a Uberschall, a rectifier, and something else, and they still sound great. And they're probably now 10 years old. Because once you do it right, it's right. It's like you can't bring out a new Mesa Boogie with exactly the same circuitry and say this one is better than the previous one, because it's new, but it's still exactly the same thing under the hood. It's kind of like, you know, there might be certain things that they do, whereas they might understand that the digital world is a bit different, so they might change slight things with the EQ, or they might have a higher sampling rate, whatever, or they might put some fake tricks in there to make it sound better here and there. But actually recreating the how the circuitry affects everything and digitally recreating that, once that's done, it's done. I mean, and it's ones and zeros, so if it's done once, it's done, and it'll be right. There is no, oh, these caps have a 5% swing in how they work, or tolerance differences or anything. These valves have tolerance differences. If it's done right, it's done right digitally, and that's that.
It's funny, just to circle back to Kemper. You talked about companies bringing out new versions, trying to say it's better, but it's the same thing. If I remember right, they just give out free firmware updates all the time. So like the original Kemper when it first came out is still, they haven't had new variations of the same hardware. Like say Axifex have had, how many variations have they had now? 1, 2,
3,
the Ultra 3, and they're maybe slightly different the way they run on processing power, but it is quite funny that Kemper, I know they brought the floor unit, I suppose, that made it more practical, but
it's still it's the same chip, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's never been out of date. You just get free firmware updates for life. And I think they started off doing something else, didn't they? Synths or something, and they had the same business model then. But they just give, once you've bought it once, you only need to buy it once. They just keep giving you the firmware updates. You don't have to ever go and buy, here's the latest version. Because there's never been the latest one. I know there's 2 variations of it, but that's just which one you buy. But they're both essentially the same thing. There's one's powered, isn't it? And one's unpowered.
Yeah. The one's got a power amp and the other one doesn't. That's right.
Yeah, so but like whatever one you bought, like say if it's around 10 years ago, you buy a brand new Kemper now, it's exactly the same as that one back then. No difference, just that obviously the software, the firmware in it will be different. But then whoever bought that 10 years ago, he can easily have updated that to exactly the same firmware you've got now.
Yeah.
It's an interesting business model compared to, like, as you say, some amp companies will keep bringing, here's the Mark II, the Mark III, version 1, version 2, but they don't seem to do that. I don't know why that is. It seems unusual not to do that compared to what most companies do.
Well, it's probably because there would need to be the ability to significantly improve on the existing model in order to warrant all of the cost of that R&D to kind of develop a new model. If right now they were to try and develop a new model, I think it would probably be nothing more than a couple of minor tweaks, whatever exists now. And I think they probably rationalized that that wouldn't be enough to make people upgrade or to draw to warrant the cost of the R&D to draw enough people to it, to all the
Yeah, but
marketing and all that kind
as
of stuff.
guitar players always want to upgrade to the new shiny thing.
Yeah.
Well, they do and they don't, because that's the thing. Is like I was just thinking as you were saying that the irony of all of this is that Kemper may have never introduced a newer model other than the Kemper, but it's like at the same time I could go out buy it right now and buy a 1959 Bassman and record a whole album with it, and it'd probably sound better than whatever I'd do with a Kemper. Yeah. And that's like,
Well,
so maybe Fender didn't need
hold
to
on.
introduce any new.
Well, yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say that you just made a point about the amps as well. I mean, people still, want the old amps.
Yeah.
How many versions of the dual rectifiers are there? There's the original 2-channel ones.
Yeah.
And you had there's like
yeah.
you hear up as far as revision Fs, and then it went to the 3-channel, and then the multi-watt, and
To be fair with that, though, I mean, I think they're dealing with enough heat and voltage and all that kind of stuff that all those are, technically improvements on that. Whereas with Kemper, it's largely solid state technology, isn't it? It's basically just some kind of computer with some knobs on it. So it's like it's not really a lot to kind of, the I suppose that in a way that does say to me that they're at least marginally better than computer companies who release tiny little incremental improvements year on year and make you buy the whole new rig all over again.
Well, but
there's that.
That's the thing with DSP stuff. It's like we are now at a level where the DSPs of even 5 years ago are so powerful that they can run all the things that we need to run. And running audio and DSP kind of software stuff is not massively intensive. So
No.
The improvements can only lie in the coding of the actual effects and not the hardware. You could argue that they might find improvements in the ADAT stuff, the inputs and output conversions, stuff like that. Fine, but the actual chips, I mean, they have more powerful than is needed to be. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to run Axe effects with, dual amps and multiple stuff.
Although when I got that Helix, I got it and I powered it up and I started building a patch and I immediately found its limitations because it has like 2 concurrent DSPs, but neither of them are large enough to. So what I really wanted to do was build a mega patch that I could just use as like a central thing. And I immediately found that like you can't run more than 2 amp models simultaneously to switch between, and if you do, then you can't run like time-based effects at the same time because that consumes too much processing power. So it's actually like the chips in the Helix are actually comparatively underpowered, which is why they've got 2 of them. But even with the 2 of them, you still can't build a patch that runs everything you'd want to run on it. So there's still with all their connectivity and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have I had the Helix Floor, which is like the flagship one, the one that's supposed to be the most powerful one. And I couldn't do everything that I wanted to do with it, which was frustrating. So, potentially, I mean, that theoretically might be the next thing that Line 6 releases, a Helix that does have either individual DSPs with more processing power or more than 2 DSPs at once.
Well,
that seems to be the
I think, well, this is my personal opinion and take on whatever I've seen from the fact that Line 6 has made things like, like some of the amps that they've brought out and then also bring out things like the Helix. I think that they are an untrustworthy company in the sense that they overhype what they do, but underneath it's a really cheap, cost cut kind of Chinese production. And the reason I say that is kind of what you're saying kind of confirms that to me, because there's no reason that in the modern world that you should run out of processing power on a pedal like that. On an effect that means that they didn't bother buying the right chips or enough chips or whatever, because there really shouldn't be any reason why you can't. I mean, I can understand it with the Valiton, which costs, you know, £250 new, but even that I can run tons of things on it at the same time, surprisingly so.
Yeah.
So
this was like a grand or something, you know. It's an expensive unit. And immediately I was like, I mean, it worked great, and there was lots of things about it that I couldn't fault, you know. But at the same time, I just felt like, okay, when I bought this thing, it's because I thought I could do, you know, a bunch of things with it. And actually, I can only do like 70% of those things, because it turns out it's not powerful enough to do the remaining 30%.
Yeah,
and that I found to be very frustrating.
Yeah, I've never had a good vibe of them. Never been much of a fan. I've never had a good vibe of them. Kind of just the way I remember we had a guitar shop here, and years ago, and I thought that, you know, Line 6 was the bee's knees because I didn't know any better, and I asked him why don't you stock any Line 6 stuff? You know, I can't remember what I was after in those days. It might have been one of those wee bean pods or whatever they were called. And he said to me, he can't stock him because in order for him to stock anything of Line 6, he has to sign this massive contract, and he has to have a certain amount of floor space dedicated just to Line 6, and he has to buy every month so much stock from them, etc., etc. So it seems a bit like one of those kind of people that you have to deal with, you know. So anyway,
Gibson are like that.
Yeah.
Top heavy.
Yeah.
So, kind of what you're saying doesn't really surprise me, but it's, I can't see that. I mean, here's a good question. I mean, what does a CPU, a decent CPU cost nowadays? A decent one, 250 pounds?
Yeah, a couple £100, yeah.
Right? If I run the amount of VSTs I have running at the same time in Reaper at the moment, without any glitching or hiccuping, at hardly any lag, and recording, is crazy. I mean, there's no reason why these units should be even remotely underpowered.
Yeah, yeah.
It really is, except for cost cutting by the company. That's my opinion.
I think Axifex isn't like that though. I think they're like, they can actually do pretty much anything. Like, funny enough, Fluff, you mentioned him earlier. His band have switched to Axifex from the Helix for that very reason.
Well,
we're running out of processing power for the live show. The stuff tons they were running, so they changed.
Well, if you look at nearly any rig rundown of any big touring band, they don't have Helixes. They all have Axifex racks, either for the full thing or sometimes just for routing or
the 4 cable method. A friend of mine used to do that.
I was running 4 cable on the Helix, but another interesting thing was that, like, when the Helix came out, and I only noticed this in retrospect, but if you went on YouTube, and even the guys who were getting stuff from Line 6 to like demo, who'd been given like these free units or whatever, you know, participating in the launch, all of their videos were like, how to make your Helix sound good. And it's like, what, you mean it doesn't sound good out of the box? You know, it's like, no, you got to do all these things to it. You know, here's how to go into this little fucking obscure sub menu and switch this on and put this at this value and, you know, turn this dial and, you know, set up this fucking thing and that fucking thing and download this bit, you know, and then your Helix might start to sound like something you might actually want to use. And it's like, and these again were the guys who were like, associated with Line 6 and were being given free shit to tour with and everything. And it's like, if they're saying, oh, okay, we need to make this video now and roll it out. So it's like, oh, what you actually need to do is roll off some of the treble in the master section so it doesn't sound all shrill and fucking horrible. It's like, well, your unit's badly designed. It should come stock, sounding good.
Well,
you plug it in. Sounds great.
You make a great point, because this is one of the things I've never understood, and that's pretty much with nearly all the multi-effects units, is that they come out and they don't sound right. And you would imagine that the first thing that the manufacturer should be after is that if I put an amp and a cab together on my effects unit, I create a new patch and put an amp and a cab together, they already sound pretty much like that amp and cab would do in real life. You would imagine that is like, there's no problem with the high end, there's no problem with the low end. It's already in that ballpark shape. You would imagine that's like the main priority of this unit. And it's weird because it's just like you were saying earlier about the patches. You never use a preset. There isn't one preset in any of multi-effects unit or VST or whatever that I've ever put in and chosen and went, wow, that sounds good. It just doesn't happen. So who the fuck makes
I'll use that. Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. How can that be?
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't understand that. I mean, like, must be somebody who doesn't play guitar who sets them up.
Probably.
It's because the products are finished to be demoed at NAMM. And so when you're on the floor at NAMM and there's all this shit going on around you, and you've got a guitar plugged into this thing and you've got a set of headphones on and you're listening to it, and you go onto the patch that demos the flanger or whatever, then it's got way too much fucking flanger on it. And you go onto the patch that like it's the 5150 patch, and it sounds like a fucking cartoon 5150 with too much distortion and too much high mids, and it's just like super abrasive and everything. And it's like, okay, it sounds like a 5150, and people go away from that going, oh wow, yeah, all these things that this thing can do. And you get into real world application where you want it to actually sound like something you might want to play with or record with or whatever, and actually it turns out that those patches are like garbage because they're just demo patches. But it's like when, I keep coming back to this, it's like when in the 80s when you bought like a little plastic Casio keyboard and it had a demo button on it. You hit the demo button and it played like some fucking awful lounge jazz bullshit with like the fucking dog barking or and all that kind of stuff. It's like no one actually listens to that. It's just to show off what the thing can do. And I think in the case of the Helix, all of the presets felt very much like that. It was like 99 presets, and all of them were just like, oh, here's this extreme stereo ping pong fucking thing with a vibrato that makes it go massively out of tune and all this kind of stuff. Oh, here's a patch that's got 19 cabs on it. It's like, what the fuck? It's like no one's gonna use that. Make me a patch that sounds like a deluxe reverb. Like, no, you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it.
Weird.
Yeah, so it's like, never mind then, So that's one of the many reasons I ended up getting rid of it, was I couldn't find anything in it that didn't sound like I had bought myself a much less expensive multi-effects unit. And that was kind of just disappointing, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, gents, I think I might call it a night because I'm starting to struggle.
It's midnight.
2 minutes to midnight. 2 minutes to midnight.
I'm gonna do this again. I'll bring another one out the next time.
Yeah, I'll bring some glasses and I'll dig into my because there it all is up there, all of my extensive whiskey collection that I haven't touched because I was drinking this that I got given by a friend of mine for. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Cornish lager, apparently.
Cool.
Yeah. So that was it. So I turned 42 last week, so I got given that as a present.
To be 42 again. Okay, guys, listen. Thanks a lot, and we'll see if we'll do this again next week. Just keep us up in the loop. All right. Take care, guys. Ciao.